7, 6, 11, 5, 9 and 20 miles today, 4, 11, 17, 32 the day before. Boot, 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 boot.
Well, folks, Unregulated podcast episode number 3. Really excited for this one here. I am joined today by retired Army Sergeant Konrad Ludwig. Maybe he says it Ludwig, right? If you're going,
I go with the full American Ludwig.
Yeah. Ludwig. All right, Konrad Ludwig. We're talking today about a book that he wrote. Konrad is a combat veteran of Iraq War II. Went over there around 2008, saw a lot of action. He wrote a really excellent book called STRYKER, The Siege of Sadr City, or is it Sadr City?
Sadr, I think, is a pronunciation, yeah.
And it's really a fantastic story. You get, perspective, from his point of view, everything that goes on. And it's not just a book. Like, find this on Amazon, 4.5 stars, 900 reviews. If you ever look at a book on Amazon, like 900 reviews is unheard of. It's really an excellent piece of writing. And another reason I'm excited to talk about Konrad is because I know him. Konrad and I met during our time at Hillsdale College. We had some mutual friends.
Yeah.
And we have some similarities. We're both Californians. We're both into Oscar and econ. We love Mises to pieces.
Yeah.
He's at least my height, probably taller and twice as wide. I think doorways are a struggle for him to get through. He's a real Viking of a man, traces his lineage back to Ragnarsson himself. Like, and I mean, he's just a incredibly good company and has a wealth of knowledge that just makes him a great person to talk to. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited.
Yeah, everyone who's listening to this, you sort of have an advantage because if you get this book, and you should, and you read it, it ends. But if you're listening to this podcast, you get the rest of the story.
Yeah.
So that said, Konrad, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going great. It's going lovely. I just had a little daughter, and she's 2 weeks old. She's in the other room sleeping with mom.
Sweet. Awesome. Happy to get you to myself for a little bit. Okay, so I want to get right into this. So you serve in Iraq, you're in the Army, you're from Pasadena, California.
Well, technically, I'm from La Cañada, California, which is a really tiny town right next to Pasadena. But I tend to tell people I'm from Pasadena because nobody really knows where La Cañada is.
Right. I say Santa Cruz instead of Aptos.
Yes,
people know that. Santa Cruz is where The Lost Boys was filmed. So everyone knows that. Tell us a little bit about like your family, your upbringing. What life was like growing up, and like sort of leading up to, your last couple years at high school, and before you made the decision to sign up for the Army.
Yeah, man. So, like I said, I grew up in La Cañada, California. My mom was a doctor. She worked for public medicine at the county hospital in LA, and it's a pretty well-to-do town. I think the stats were that it's technically per capita has like a higher income than Beverly Hills, but that's also because it doesn't have a sewer system. So there's all this stuff about it. It doesn't have high density housing and whatever. But it's known for being a place where a lot of Hollywood producers and a lot of real estate agents and a lot of rocket scientists live, right? So it's pretty upper middle class, or just upper class, if further up the hill you go, right? And I went to public school right on the border of Pasadena, and had a really troubled youth. And so I definitely was not, I think most of the kids that went to my high school, the kind of kids get like 4.0s and go on Ivy League schools. And I was definitely not one of those kids, right? So I was like a kind of an art nerd, kind of a choir nerd, also played football. So it was a fun mashup. And then by right about my junior year, I was failing everything except for art and football and choir, and hated school and wanted to do something else with my life. And concurrently to that, America had recently invaded Iraq. So I joined in 2005. Iraq was obviously invaded in 2003, I think. Wow, it's been a while. And 2004.
Yeah, 2003, because Afghanistan's 2001. And I have a book on the shelf back here. It's called the winner of the 2003 Iraq oil war. So
yeah. So it's what is it like? Everyone has their, where were you when Kennedy was shot for the boomer generation, as the kids say. But like for us, it's, where were you when 9/11 happened? And I was in the 8th grade and was in history class. We watched the towers fall. Well, first I woke up for the first tower getting hit. And then I went to school, and then I watched both towers fall at school. And then they sent us home because the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is the NASA's like offsite mission headquarters, is like right up the hill from our high school. And they were worried that might be a target. So
yeah.
That kind of kicked it off, and there's this really big patriotic moment at that time. A lot of flags were waved. I remember going to school for like 2 weeks just with a big American flag out of my backpack. And like a lot of people, my parents were leaning conservative at the time. And so they're now pretty demonstrably conservative, right? But they were leaning conservative and generally supported the war in Iraq. And I also supported the war in Iraq. And but also not just because of like 9/11. I think, obviously this precipitated it. There's tend to get conflated. So there was the invasion of Afghanistan for fighting Al Qaeda, and then there's the invasion of Iraq for whatever. Which we'll talk about later, right? But like I supported it at the time, and very convictedly for a long time. And then I turned 17, and I was obviously feeling out of school, and I didn't have anything to do, and I wanted out, and I found a way out. So I tested out of high school. And California had a really easy exam to do that. And then I joined the Army because I figured, if, I was 17, I was fit, I was healthy, I believed in the cause. And if I'm not going, then who else is going to go? Right. So it's just a really put your money where your mouth is. Like, if I really believe this thing, I should be willing to go. So that's kind of like the rational answer. I mean, the emotional answer is the same reason why I think most men go to war, which is it's a grand adventure. And I got to fly across the world and play with a bunch of big guns. So that was pretty fun.
Right.
But yeah, from there, went to basic training, ended up at a unit that had just come back from Iraq in Fort Lewis, that at the time was the 1-5 infantry. They're called the Death Masters of the 25th Infantry Division. We reflagged to be the first squadron, 2nd Stryker Cavalry Regiment, which was sort of like a dragoons regiment from Civil Wars, reactivated. So the idea was that we were infantry mounted on whatever. I'm getting kind of technical, but so we reflagged, went to Germany. Our mission there was to kind of show off the Stryker for NATO allies, and then the troop surge happened, and our unit got called up to fight in Baghdad because we specialized pretty much, not like we weren't like a special operations unit, but our training and our specialty and our capabilities were very uniquely suited for urban combat. And so we went to Baghdad, and we were assigned basically on the front line of a place called Sadr City, which was more or less the Wild West. It was denied territories controlled by the Jaish al-Mahdi, also known as the Mahdi Army. And then the rest of the book, that's the lion's share of the book. So I kind of just blitzed through the boring part of the book, which is like the first.
There's some really fascinating parts leading up to your actual deployment. I'll get to that in a sec.
Yeah.
So maybe this is an American thing. I know you spent some time in Germany, both as a kid and when you fly out, right? You go and train with NATO in Germany before going to Kuwait and Iraq. But is this an American, I don't know, aspect of our culture, which is we tend to be very military focused, right? Everyone can think of someone in their family, maybe even their immediate family, who has been in the military in some capacity. So for my dad, he was in the Marine Corps. His brother was in for a little bit. I think he broke his ankle in boot camp and, got booted out. But, my mom's dad was, Air Force pilot. Is this an American thing, or is this, this level of patriotism that,
I think for a lot of people
in my personal life?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of that, right, is it does run the family. I think for a lot of people that I served with, that was definitely the case. But
what was it for you? Did you have a military family?
No, man. Let's see. My grandpa was his immigrant after World War II, so he served in the Norwegian Resistance. And my other grandpa was in the Army, but I never really met him. He died when I was very young, and my dad was very close to him. So I basically didn't have any military influence or background in my family at all. I was the first person to sign up. I was the first person to do that. My sister shortly joined the Navy after me. But no, I mean, I think the closest I got was I had this friend David who had a friend who was she going to Caltech or something, and she ended up joining the Army Reserves because she was like wanted to write a journalist piece about what it was like to go through basic training. Like, no, I mean, growing up in kind of a wealthy suburb of Los Angeles, like it definitely was not the kind of place where, there are rah, people waving flags and stuff. So the idea that I went to school with the flag, I mean, there was that patriotic moment, of course, but very few people that I served with had my kind of background. But that being said, though, I would say that kind of a misunderstanding about the infantry in particular, because I ended up joining the infantry, was because I wanted to play with guns and well, it's more nuanced than that. But I think the military has this rap as being a place, especially back then, it was kind of disparaged as a place where like poor, uneducated people go to escape their circumstances. And there's definitely an element of that. But in my experience, I think most of the people who are poor and uneducated actually who are like kind of smart enough to use that avenue. I think a lot of them take advantage of the ability for the military to give you world-class training in kind of anything. And they usually don't join like combat arms.
Yeah.
And I'm making pretty broad statements here, but I mean, like there's a career path here, right? Where like if you live in the boonies or you're a disparaged minority in the middle of a large city, you can absolutely join the military. If you have the chops, you can become like a helicopter mechanic, right? Do 3 years as a helicopter mechanic, and then you're an ASC certified helicopter mechanic who is certified to work on heavies. And then like that's a 6-figure job, right?
Yeah.
So what I found, my experience was that I think that most of the people who were in the infantry were working class Americans from military families, a lot of people from Texas, a lot of people from the Midwest, Bible Belt, right? People who really felt the call from patriotism. And there were a smaller minority of people who definitely came from wealthy backgrounds, kind of like me, right? Where they joined for ideological reasons. They definitely weren't there for the paycheck, right? And so I kind of found myself in that boat pretty quickly. Also sort of like an artsy fartsy weirdo, which I was like a computer nerd. I was into art, I was into choir, and I was tall and lanky. I definitely didn't look like a Viking at the time. And that actually later that gets to, I ended up being a radio guy for a long time because I knew how to type, like literally out of Black Hawk Down.
Yeah. Well, I ask because I think a lot of boys consider this when they're in high school. It's like, oh, what am I going to do after high school? Right. I was sort of in the same boat as you. I was a terrible student in high school. I went back many years after I graduated and looked at my old report cards. I was like, oh, I was freaking stupid. Like I thought I was getting at least 2.0s. I wasn't. I didn't break 3.0 until like my junior year. And that was like, because I made up for it in my second semester or something like that. But for me, it was something I considered. A lot of my friends ended up going into different branches. And I'm a little bit younger than you. I was in kindergarten when 9/11 happened. I didn't graduate high school until 2014. So, and we're both still millennials, but I was born in 96. I'm the last year of the millennial generation. So there's some differences between us culturally, experientially, I guess. We did not have honorable motivations in considering joining the military. And I was curious to ask whether that was common. I mean, honestly, we had pretty wicked views about why we wanted to join. And I think it would have been really bad for me had I done so. I don't know what kind of person I would have turned out to be. But is that something that you saw? Like, I mean, I did not have the best friend group. So this isn't, necessarily a good sample, but 2 of my best friends got kicked out. And two of my other best friends, stayed in, and one of them was, comedian, class clown, came back, was serious and unfeeling. And I was like, you're not, what happened? Right. So I want to get into that a little bit later, but what's your like first impression? Was it
Yeah, no, I mean, I
honorable
think,
intentions, pragmatism, a mixed bag, what?
well, yeah, like anything, I think there's just, I think the underlying detail about joining the military generally, especially in America and especially in the modern military, is that you are signing up for a subculture, right? Like whatever you think it is, it's not what you think it is. It's like you literally live in your own bubbles. You have your own communication styles. You have your own culture, like your cultural icons. Like you basically kind of leave the American cultural zeitgeist, and you kind of become this other in that context. And within that sphere, right? I mean, it's a grab bag. You meet people from all walks of life. You like uh, people from big cities, people who grew up super poor. There's this one guy that I knew who grew up like in the panhandle of Florida and like didn't have front teeth, right? Just literally Appalachian poverty, and then also people who grew up in South Central.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you get people who, like some of our officers, right? We're like the children of millionaires, and like if they leave, they're going to go become business owners or something.
Yeah.
And everybody is just together, right? And at that point in time, because if I had to generalize, I would say that like by the time I was actually able to join, I was 17, my parents had to sign a waiver and like let me go. And that was probably really, I mean, I know it was really scary for them because that was right after 2004. Casualties had never been higher. Roadside bombs started becoming a thing, right? So like this is the entrance of modern warfare, where generally it's just you randomly die, and like that that was hard for them. But then when you get in, like when I got in, there was sort of like my mentors. So there were this sort of like senior ranking guys that you'd still see on the front line, and those would be the guys that were in when the wars started, right? The guys that served in Afghanistan. Like my drill sergeants, to a man. Well, one or two of them didn't serve in Afghanistan, but that's because they reactivated after retirement to serve for the purpose of training. But all my drill sergeants were stacked, served in Afghanistan, served in the invasion of Iraq. The all of the like first line team leaders and squad leaders that I had were guys that had fought in the Battle of Fallujah. They had fought in the Battle of Mosul. They went down to Baghdad and like protected the first free Iraqi elections. So like these were guys who had seen stuff, right? And it's kind of funny, actually. I ended up in that unit. Because I was 17, my recruiter gave me, for my bonus, he gave me a priority seat to combat, which I legally couldn't go to combat because I was 17. And he knew that. And I didn't know that. Like, I was like, no, I want to go, put me in the hot seat, like, send me out, Sarge. And he was like, yeah, totally. I'll send you out. And he I think he knew that was going to happen. So basically, they saw I was 17, and the algorithm was like, nope, we're going to stick you on a unit that just got back. And I was really salty about that when it happened, but ended up being the best thing that ever happened in my military career, because we got to Fort Lewis. These guys had literally written the book on how to use strikers in combat. So there were 2 units that had deployed with strikers at the time, which for the uninitiated, it's an 8-wheeled light armored vehicle. And in our use case, we use what's called the ICV, the infantry carrier vehicle, which is basically just a minivan, like a combat minivan, we kind of called it. And it's just a wheeled vehicle, and you can stick an entire squad in it, and it can drive up to a building relatively quiet and unload an entire squad of 12 dudes, while 10 people dismounting, right? 10 or 11. And so they had deployed. They were the second unit, I think, chronologically to deploy with that vehicle. And they particularly participated, like I said, in a lot of urban combat. So then when they came back, the Department of Defense and Department of the Army pinged them to literally write the technical manual and strategic guides for how to use a striker in combat. So those are the guys that I was learning how to fight from. And that was awesome. A lot of urban combat drills and stuff. But sorry, the question being like the motivations, I would say generally there was still like a large ideological undercurrent. If you were joining in 2005, you believed in what was happening, right? Like there wasn't, you'd be crazy if you were just like, I'm going to go join the infantry in early 2005 because I want to stop working at Wendy's, right? Like that's not typically what the kind of people we ran into.
Yeah. Let me get this straight. You're like 20 minutes into this episode and you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel. You can fix that by clicking that little subscribe button and the bell. All of our videos will be sent to you on your YouTube channel, and you can watch other episodes of this podcast like this one that I just did with Wisconsin historian Andrea Nolan. But I'm announcing today, I have just created a special YouTube channel for this show. If you go to my bio page, click that YouTube button, it takes you straight to the Unregulated YouTube channel where I will upload all of these episodes. You can get them all in one place. But since you're on the MacGyver Institute website already, go to the top right, hit that donate button, and please give us whatever you can. Even if it's just $5, it all helps. Let's get back to the show. Let me go back to when you were talking about being shipped out to Washington after basic training. This is sort of like the first point in the book where you undergo a bit of a change in your thinking and how you feel about things. You're practicing jujitsu with someone. Can you tell us about that experience?
Yeah, sure. So the Army, Marine Corps also, probably at this point, every branch, their technical term of art for fighting is like hand-to-hand combat is just, Army combatives, which is basically some sort of mixed martial arts, largely informed by Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And because we're the infantry, for the uninitiated, the infantry's job is to close with and kill the enemy by means of fire and maneuver. Our job is to have the guns, pull the triggers, and fight the bad guys, right? And an essential part of that is to be prepared for hand-to-hand combat. And so every week on a Thursday, we would have sergeant's time, which was just combatives training. And that mostly was just pretty much 80-90% sparring, until blackout or tap. Yeah. And that was kind of what I was expecting by the time I'd finished basic training. Like, I knew that kind of shenanigan went on. What I didn't expect was that, there was also a whole mindset you have to really change, I think, to be an effective infantryman in that kind of environment, which was drilled into me by my leadership, particularly my first team leader, who was a guy named Sergeant High. And he was very serious about making sure we had the mentality to be resilient infantrymen, right? So he would, every morning you wake up, you have to, I think it was, we woke up like 5:30, sergeants come through at 5:30. Yeah. So we woke up at 5, sergeants come through at 5:30. We have to be ready to go by 6, formed up by 6:15, right? First formation, 6:30 every morning. And so when Sergeant High would show up sometime around 5:20, 5:30, the door would open and you needed to be ready to fight, because he was a really good fighter and he loved fighting, right? And he wanted everybody in his team to be ready and able to fight at the moment's notice. So a lot of that first year was waking up to hand-to-hand combat until tap or blackout. And if you tapped too quickly, Sergeant High would not consider it to be a real tap, and you would continue to fight, right? And I think those really, I think, I can't stress the change mentality. You talk about your friend came back as a very stern guy. I think I can identify with that. To me, joining the Army was such an intellectual thing. My motivations were so intellectual and emotional that I didn't really think about what I was doing in this weird way. That, the first time at basic training, when they handed me a rifle, I remember looking at this rifle and being I had this moment of oh yeah, that's the job. Right? I didn't even it happened. I was oh yeah, I have to learn how to shoot this thing. I have to learn how to disassemble it. All of a sudden, all those movies just make sense. This is the job, right? This is, if I'm a carpenter, my job's a hammer, and this is my job. And in a very similar way, I wasn't quite, I didn't expect, and I didn't really understand in this deep soul level that oh no, my whole person needs to be able to change to be able to do this job effectively. And at that period of time, 2005, with the drill sergeants that we had, fantastic drill sergeants. My platoon senior drill sergeant was a special forces weapons sergeant, and the second in command was this guy who had served as a mortarman in Iraq or in Afghanistan, during the invasion. These are guys that were guy that ran the U.S. mines field. I mean, I'm reading between the lines. I think his entire squad was blown up here because he was just clearly suffering from some kind of PTSD, and his job was to teach you to expect bombs to go off at any moment. And there was just this whole attitude, I think, of the wartime mentality that was very front and center. And
it's page 61 in this book. You're sparring with Sergeant High. He's not letting up. He's really beating on you, and you talk about this moment that something changes, and he's really, laying you down on the mat. He said, "Do you want to kill me?" And you say, "Yes." He's like, "Really?" And say it, right? Say it,
Yeah.
say it, say it. You say, "I want to kill you." And you fight as hard as you can. And I think you still get put on your butt, right?
Oh, yeah.
But you say, for all my talk about frontline action, one of the hardest lessons I had to learn in basic training was that I wasn't raised to be a fighter. I never sought out violence. I didn't like inflicting pain. Most of all, I never understood how somebody can think that beating the crap out of another person is fun. So was this gradual or suddenly where like in this moment when you feel like this intense rage and sparring with Sergeant High, like, okay, I can flip a switch?
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
well, I don't want to make it sound like, a little Private Ludwig in his first year, in his first unit was just like
He becomes a Terminator,
right?
Yeah.
But like there was definitely a moment and that was what I tried to crystallize in that book. There was definitely that moment where I finally realized, like, okay, like literally no holds barred. Like I it's the realization of like, I probably cannot hurt this man if I tried. And I'm so like, why not try? And then that also kind of changed the whole attitude I took about it. Instead of there's something in combat, we call it the initiative, seizing the initiative or using initiative. The initiative is basically in a firefight and an engagement. When you're in a situation where you essentially get to make decisions, right? You get to decide when you're going to attack. You get to decide how you're going to move. And if anyone who's been in a fight, like even a fist fight, kind of knows that there's a difference between, you call it being on the back foot, right? That's not having initiative. So if you're reacting to punches, if you're trying to avoid getting punched, you do not have the initiative. And I think if I were to put an intellectual, tactical, strategic charm on what Sergeant High was doing there, was he was really trying to teach us, like, you need to seize the initiative. And in a job, right? When you're talking about, say, like urban combat, what you're trying to get somebody to do, some mild-mannered, decent person who can follow instructions, is you're trying to get them to kick in a door and shoot somebody they don't know for no reason, right? Well, they'll have a gun or whatever, right? But like that's it. Like, you need to be able to just like, okay, like I'm going to open this door and I'm going to see somebody in a split notice and you decide to kill them. I'm not going to waver. I'm not going to, like, I need to assess the situation. I need to know if they're a legitimate threat. Obviously, that stuff needs to happen through training. But you can't have somebody who's afraid to seize the initiative. I think that's what Sergeant High was trying to teach us.
So how long do you stay at that base in Washington before you finally fly to Germany?
Wow, gee.
Is it a year-long thing? More?
Yeah, I think it was, right. I think I reported for duty like February or something of 2006, and I think we shipped out like in August to go to Germany, and that was, yep.
Yeah. How long are you in Germany before you fly to Kuwait?
I think like a year and a half. Oh, and I guess because I don't know, we covered this for the people who don't know what the book is like really culminating. It's culminating in the 2008 Battle of Sadr City, which was one of the largest military engagements in the Iraq War, which our unit ended up fighting in. So let's see, that was 2006. Basically, was just learning how to fight in Washington, learning how to, like, getting to know my unit and everything. Some shenanigans ensue while reflagging to a nominally cavalry unit, which was like a big betrayal, but that's just fun stuff. When we get to Germany, that's where really good training opportunities. I think like older wizened me is just like, wow, man, really had a great, right? There's this, the facility we're at was called Grafenwehr. They have a really good set of ranges there. It was top of the line. They're all built and maintained by the German government, and we rent them from the Germans. So like, we're talking state of the art urban terrain simulation, state of the art weapons training, like long range weapons for vehicles. Pretty much any kind of vehicle we use, you can train there. Any kind of weapon system we use, you can train there. 810 Warthogs would do like live fire training in the middle of the training area. So like on a regular basis, you just hear 810s flying overhead, just leveling a town that used to be in the middle of the training area. And then we did longer training missions down to a place called Hohenfels, which is in southern Germany. And that's this giant, it's like the size of, I don't know, it's kind of hard to put like a finger on it. It's a very large training area. It has something like 3 whole cities in it. And when I say cities, I mean like they've actually built small towns with 20 some odd buildings that are 3 or 4 stories tall. There's like a train station that connects them. There's a water utility line, like a fake water utility line. So And those areas, what it was like when we would do these Hohenfels, these training area, the missions in Hohenfels, they would be like our entire, effectively what we call our brigade would go down there. Our entire battalion would go down there. So we'd have 700 people or more participating in a full vertical integration training opportunity. So and that was awesome. So like one of the things you have to train, for example, is what happens when everybody starts dying. So we call it a mass CAS event, for mass casualty, right? And they never tell you when you're going to do one of those. So like there's a really good there's an event there. I don't talk about it in the book, but one of like the more prescient moments in my mind was like memories was going into this, like having this big plan these officers come up with to assault the city, and going in and just having like 70% of our unit get wiped out, and trying to continue the fight, right? And trying to figure out how to like, okay, scrape together. We had a platoon of 50 some odd people, and now we have 6 of us. Like, can we still form an effective squad? Like, what can we do? How can we help? And that kind of training is just awesome, because you have like when the range cadre that are out in the field, they have these little deck of cards called casualty feeder cards, and they will so if you get like shot, they'll give you a card that's like sucking chest wound, right? And they hand it to you. And your job is to act like you have a sucking chest wound. And then the medic will come over and start trying to treat a sucking chest wound. And the cadre will sit there and watch the treatment and be like, okay, well, did you do this right? Did you do this right? Won't give them any information other than like, okay, like he's starting to wheeze. What's wrong, right? And then he'll like upgrade the casualty feeder card to like tension pneumothorax or something, right? And then you get a casualty stable, you evac them to the vehicle. The vehicle has to drive them back to the base. That have to get like, at that point, they simulate picking up with a helicopter. The helicopter pilots like land on the LZ, and they don't carry the actual person, but they land on the LZ and fly to the hospital. And then the Army hospital gets that casualty feeder card. And they're like, okay, so you have tension pneumothorax. The guy was shot, roughly an hour and a half ago. He's suffering from hypothermia. Go, right? And so then the hospital, these guys are training, I think maybe in like a field hospital setting or a real hospital setting, how to triage, over 100 people getting waxed, in quick succession. And all that, like, I think the younger Konrad really, really, really wanted to go get some, right? Like, obviously, just total hard on for combat. And instead, I got to spend 2 years, doing advanced urban combat training in Germany, doing like vertical integration training with a bunch of like, at one point worked with some Polish special forces guys, and I was the radio guy at that point. So I got to like talk to their officer and like understand how they see as a non-NATO partner in an operation, or maybe they were NATO at the time, like I don't know, but as like a participant in an operation with an American force, right? Hearing their mentality of like, well, we know we're going to get sidelined, so how do we integrate with American officers so we get what we want, and like. That kind of stuff was really invaluable. And I think by the time we got deployed, we had a quality of training that I think is pretty rare. And again, it's not that we were like spec ops or something, but just really, really good training. And so that definitely came into fruition when we got our mission, because that was exactly what we were doing.
In the first 2 chapters, you really stress how much you want to fight. You specifically ask for combat role, you wanted action. In chapter 3, The Gates to Babylon, you're in Germany and you finally get the call that your unit's being deployed, and you're about to get on a flight to Kuwait. This was a moment that really stuck out to me, and I thought this is important. And there are some things that you repeated in these couple pages, and then you brought it up again much later in the book. I was like, okay, this has got to be important. So you get on a flight and you have an experience with a flight attendant. Keep in mind, folks, this whole time Konrad wants action, and what are you thinking when you're on this flight, and what was the significance of this flight attendant?
Yeah, man, wow, this is surreal, dude. Like, okay, first, I think I'll start with sort of the detached surreality of like
be as detached as you want, because I'm about to read a passage that will be very attached.
Like it's so first, like to explain to the readers this thing that like what I'm trying to explain in the book is I was trying to provide sort of perspective I had, which was being kind of aware of like the almost absurdity, like the bureaucratic absurdity of like, we have 700 guys, you have to get them to combat, and like, how do you get them there? And like, when in the part where you have to get 700 guys from Germany to Kuwait, that's like 700 guys from a country we're not at war with to a country we're not at war with. So you're just going to fly them, charter flight and lowest budget that the government can afford, charter flight. And so there's this whole thing that what you're getting at in the book where I'm like describing like it was an American charter flight between two American territories. So technically they like shipped out a contingent of the TSA to like check us down. And
Okay. Yeah. So you had to run in with this TSA agent. And
yeah.
like, thing, but
there's that whole thing. But then when you get on the flight, it's like, it's so surreal.
Sorry, I got to interrupt. We could cover this really quickly. So Konrad has to go through a TSA checkpoint. He has his entire freaking go bag. He's got a rifle. He's got hundreds of rounds of ammunition.
No, it was only a 30 round mag, but like
just 30 rounds.
So the way this works is like when you have a large movement like this, you have what's called the force protection. Somebody gets pinged for force protection. It's kind of random selection, right? So like one person every squad gets a 30 round mag. Okay, right. And the idea is if at any point in time while you're being transited, like why would we hire security? We have a bunch of people who know what they're doing. So like I was randomly selected to be one of the people that had a loaded 30 round magazine. So I'm going through this this American Air Base. I forgot, it was probably a Rammstein or something, right? And like this TSA, I have to go through a metal detector. I have my assault pack, I have body armor, I have an M4, and I have a loaded magazine like in the buttstock, like mag holster that I had on my rifle. And I'm going through this freaking checkpoint and my I put everything up, put through the metal detector, whatever, and like my Gerber sets off the metal detector. And this TSA agent,
what's a Gerber? Not everyone.
Yeah, it's my multi-tool with a knife on it and like little pliers, right? Just like a basic tool, right? And if you're in the infantry too, like there's certain things you need to have. There's just like boots and a Gerber, right? Or like a Leatherman, some kind of multi-tool, right? Because that will save your life when something mechanical fails and you need pliers or you need a little file or whatever. And so I had this like $80 multi-tool, and the thing goes off, and she's like, "You are not allowed to have that on the plane." And I'm like, "What do you mean I'm not allowed to have a multi-tool on the plane?" Right? Like, and I have this whole vignette in the book where like I kind of this flirty argument with her about just like I'm about to get on a plane with like level 4 body armor, a rifle, and 30 rounds of ammunition, and you're holding me up because of multi-tool. And she was like, yeah. So like, and she won, right? Like there's a whole line of people who had to go through the metal detector and people were not waiting for me to like, I guess I didn't read the rules. Somebody knew. And so, so I had to throw away my multi-tool because it wasn't allowed on the airplane. And from there, it's like just being on some white label, 747 or whatever. I forgot how long the flight was, in like 5-6 hours down to Kuwait. And I think the point you're getting at was a flight attendant, right? That's what we're building.
The flight attendant, yeah. So you're, it's starting to hit you the realization of you're gonna get exactly what you were asking for.
Yeah,
and you're dealing with that.
Yeah, man. I mean, this flight was boring, right? There was like maybe 1 in 10 people had a portable DVD player, which was a luxury at the time, right? And I'm just staring. There's no. Like I said, it was the lowest budget carrier. It's white label. It's not like flying Delta or something, right? There's no in-flight entertainment. It's 2008. I'm staring at the back of a seat. Most people are trying to sleep. I couldn't really sleep. Well, I think I slept for some of it. Man, and there's this flight attendant who just like, I'll probably cry. Like, just remember this because it was she was such a beautiful soul, right? She just one of those people, like she was acting like a flight attendant on some wonderful first class flight, and she was treating everyone so lovely. And she just like, there's a lot of testiness going on, people yelling at each other, right? There's like very specific esoteric instructions on how you like pack your body armor under the seat in front of you, and like what direction to point your rifle, and there are people who are like holding up the line. It's just all this stuff has to happen very quickly, and like we don't have room for tomfoolery. And this woman just was able to defuse and make everyone happy. And then there was this period like halfway through the flight where I was just kind of there, and she had already memorized everyone's names. She knew these little details about people, like getting people pillows, and she just like, I don't know, she just was really good at her job, right? And then I ended up having this really touching conversation with her where it became very clear to me that she had chosen this job, and I like didn't ask her, but I was morally certain at that point that the reason why she had chosen to do this job was because she had lost probably a son or a husband, she was probably late 30s or something.
Yeah.
And she had lost it. Clearly, the conflicts had claimed somebody important to her, and
Right.
and that really hit home. Just like, oh, I'm going to get off this plane, and I'm going to be, one more step. Then we get in the combat flight, actually flying into Baghdad from Kuwait.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned, so you talk about how beautiful she is, and she's beautiful in two ways. She's attractive, physically, right? She's pretty.
Yeah.
But as you're talking to her, she's also, as you said, like she's warm, like she's a doting person, and she's kind of acting like a surrogate mother for you. And what you say in the book, you have this conversation with her, and this great conversation, and she explains, why she's doing this, and I'm trying to make the experience so pleasant for everyone. You say, as she walked away, I had a picture in my head as clear as crystal. It was of a son who'd been shipped off to war to die. It was of a mother who had lost the most important thing in her world. It was of her becoming a flight attendant so she could save her soul, so she could have 1,000 surrogate sons, so she could care for them like she hoped her son had been cared for, give every one of us a glimpse of our own mother, and remind us what we were fighting for. I wish I could go back in time and kiss her, give her a great big bear hug, and hold her while she cried. I wish I could thank her. As I read this, I knew exactly what you were talking about. I think every man, every boy always loves his mother.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, you come across a woman who is just like your mom.
Yeah.
And even though this woman may not have resembled your mother, in appearance, all good moms are the same.
Yeah.
Right? They all do the same thing. They all love their kids. They protect them. They look after them. They comfort them. And I thought it was a beautiful moment in this book. And it's, one that I've shared, and it's one that I get a glimpse of when I fly. I have layovers in Dallas, and I always get some sweet Southern woman as a flight attendant, and I'm just like, God bless the South. Thank you. Thank you for making these wonderful women. And it's a beautiful thing. Like, only a woman could have done that for you.
Yeah.
Only a mother could have done that for you.
Yeah.
And it's obviously impactful. It made it into the book, and it comes up later. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, because I don't have a question, but
I think it's kind of fun looking back on the book, right? So for anyone that decides they want to go buy the book, there's like I kind of made a new 10th anniversary edition. I cleaned up a bunch of stuff, and and it gave me an opportunity, because I was retypesetting it, reworking it, and editing it, and I gave me an opportunity to just revisit this thing that I honestly had written. I think it consumed a lot of my life for a long time, and I think the greatest blessing was I was able to just kind of put it down and move on. And I remember when I was writing this book, right, there was the way it started was honestly just therapy. Actually, I'm going to tell this story because this is really funny, and I think people get a kick out of this. Like, how this book came to be is pretty funny. So like I said, I was a radio guy, and I was known as being kind of a nerd. And when you're the radio guy for your officer and infantry platoon, you kind of get to kind of see through the looking glass, right? You get to stand on the other side of certain imaginary lines a lot of the time. You get to hang out with your officer while he's talking to the company commander. You get to see certain conversations that you otherwise wouldn't see. And you get to participate in military operations. I used to call it being a battlefield secretary, right? And I actually was a radio guy for a conspicuously long amount of time. I think I was a radio guy for like a year and a half. And it was this I hated it at the time. I got pinged to be the radio guy because I knew how to type and I didn't have a driver's license. So a bag platoon sergeant couldn't stick me in a driver's hole. So he made me the radio guy, right? And then I was pretty good at the job. And then after a couple months, we get a new platoon leader. So he's like, well, I don't want to take you off. And then we'll have two new guys that know how to run a platoon. So you stick around for the new platoon leader. And so I stuck around with the new platoon leader. And then we found out we're getting deployed. And he's like, well, now you've been a radio guy, you know, for a year, and you have all this experience. I'm not going to pull you off the radio right as things are about to get real and we're about to go into real combat, right? Like, and so it's like, all right, like, so that's how I ended up. That actually informed a lot of the perspective of the book. Was just like I got to see this side of how things were run, and I ended up making a lot of cool relationships with a lot of different people just to do my job, and that gave me just a unique perspective that stuck with me through the whole conflict. And so I ended up, I had this reputation of being a nerdy guy who kind of liked to write. And then when we got back to Germany after our deployment, we just got totally trashed. And we had just fought this huge battle, and we thought everybody knew about it. We were going to go home and people like would know who we were and they'd remember, right? And like nobody knew, nobody had any idea. It was an election cycle. Nobody wanted to talk about the war. Like Republicans didn't want to talk about the troop surge because it got super violent. Democrats didn't want to talk about the war because it looked like we were going to win. Like it was just like nobody wanted to talk about the war. And at least that's my interpretation. Anyone's free to disagree. But like for what it was worth at the time, if you walked around and you said, hey, I was in the Battle of Sadr City, people would be like, what are you even talking about? Like that means nothing to me. And so we were just, I remember one of my friends was just like, dude, this is BS, man. I just totally trashed in my like little suite in the barracks. So he's like, well, totally, this is BS, man. Like this is some people should know, man. And I was just like, you know, yeah, people should know. I'm gonna write a book, man. I'm gonna tell our story. And these three other guys are like, yeah, tell our story, man. So I kind of started writing. Really, it was just kind of trauma dumping. I was just sort of writing like the worst experiences of my life. And as I was doing this, I realized, well, this isn't really a story. And it just kind of reads as like a poorly written 50 Shades of Grey fanfic, except with combat. And that kind of forced me to start looking like, okay, well, how do I like turn this into a narrative? How's this turn into anything? But it really muddled around for like a year. Until like a year later, one of those guys that was in the suite just calls me and he's like, hey man, how you been? And well, you know, we kind of catch up. He's like, so how's the book coming? And I'm like, oh, well, yeah, I'm working on it, right? And then like kind of have this defensive conversation where I'm looking like, okay, like yeah, I'm working on it, but I don't like no promises, right? Some unrelated guy that wasn't even in the suite calls me, and like we're catching up, and he's just like, "Hey, I hear you're writing a book, man. That's awesome." And I was like, "Oh man!" And then like my old PL calls me, and he's like, "Hey, you know, I was talking to some of the officers. They said they heard through the grapevine that you're like writing a book." And I was like, yeah." And then our company commander, the Captain Bradford, sent me the final draft of the official history of the battle. Like he just emailed it to me, so I would have that reference. And so I was sitting here and I'm like, okay, well, clearly a lot of people like I need to do this for the honor of the people, like for the people that I fought with that, you know, deserve to have somebody talk about what they did. I also needed it for myself. Like that was the first motivation, right? But like that was when it got real. And I was like, oh, I actually need, like, this is rubber hits the road. Like I need to write a book. And so I started like sincerely writing the book. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah. So the flight attendant thing. So yeah, like I said, it was this sort of trauma dumping, and there was just a lot of like, here's a firefight. And as I wrote firefights, right, there are these things when you're actually in a firefight, you know, if you're not like a Navy SEAL, you're not like Marco Cottrell or something behind enemy lines. Like if you're in like a real bona fide firefight, like I don't know if you see the movie Warfare.
Yeah, the A24 film that just came out. Yeah,
that absolutely, hands down, everybody who wants to know what 2005 to 2010 was like in Baghdad, like if you were in like an actual engagement, it just really nails the sort of like bizarre Twilight Zone feel. You know, sometimes it's crazy and it's super fast paced, and sometimes it's super slow, right? So what were you gonna say?
Well, I was just gonna say, were you as struck by that moment in the film, without spoiling it, by the sound design when everyone's ears are ringing? And do you know what I'm talking about? Yes. I was like, oh, whoever did that did a great job. Yes. I was like, I know that sound.
Yes.
I don't know if anyone's been so unfortunate as
man, you'll get later
live gunfire in a place where there's not supposed to be live gunfire, like Chicago or Oakland. It's quite scary.
Yeah. Okay, like later in the book, when I'm talking about the schoolhouse that we occupied behind enemy lines, when I'm running through that building, it was just a concrete building, right? Like it had chairs and stuff because it was classrooms, but it's just like, if you can just imagine block wall, concrete roof. I mean, there's no soft niceness at all. And that was like a schoolhouse in a poor country. And hearing these guys shoot guns, you know, when you're in that situation, it's denied terrain, like Peltors were really new and flashy at the time, and they certainly were not a thing that every infantryman's running around with, right? And so like you would have your little squishy ear pro, and you have to kind of make the decision, like, do I want to be able to hear somebody sneak up on us, or do I want to protect my hearing?
Yeah.
And so, you know, running through this building, just like, oh my gosh, your ears just ringing. And that movie really nailed that. But this isn't about that movie though. I mean, highly recommend that movie to get like a visual auditory tone. They nailed it. But but anyway, but what I was saying is that like when I would write these engagements or talk about what we did, I noticed it just kind of got this boring, we went here and we did this, and we did one here and we did this. And that was the thing I noticed in a lot of other personal memoirs, military nonfiction that I've read, even the really, really good stuff, right? Like, I think you start taking for granted the sort of way that every firefight, even though they're kind of like similar, is at the same time like a whole different kind of new and experience, like scary experience. And it's hard to like write that. And then I started realizing like all these other, what I really wanted to get at in the book was just like, what did it feel like? And why did it feel like that? And I think that opened up, that was this epiphany I had pretty late in the game, when I was writing the first draft of like, oh, you know, like things like that TSA interaction, or things like that flight attendant, things like going to the chow hall, right? I think they're so important, because I think what I really wanted to do was tell people, hey, this is what it was like. And it mostly was that. It mostly was walking around being super bored, right? It mostly was stupid bureaucracy about how do you even get batteries. Like for some reason, nobody's allowed to get a battery. Well, we could talk about that because, you know, given the nature of the podcast, kind of a centralized production, central planning of who gets batteries led to a lot of people not having batteries who needed batteries, right? But like, yeah, I mean, so I think that's looking back, I think that's one of the things I really like about what I'm really proud of with that book, is that I think I did a good job of providing those types of vignettes. Where you're like, hey, like there's this whole life. There's somebody who decides to become a flight attendant on a budget white label carrier to fly people from Germany to Kuwait, or from Dallas to Kuwait.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that I appreciate a lot about the book, because I don't know if you share this opinion, but I get really fed up with the Spec Ops guys on YouTube who have these 2-hour podcasts where they talk about how like door busting is like always the most badass thing and nothing ever goes wrong because they're so good at what they do and no one's ever scared, and or you know, stuff like that. It's like you're the most, maybe that's true, right? You're the most highly trained people in the world. I don't know, maybe you're just like,
I mean, sure, right? I mean, like,
person, right? Same thing with like, you know, a Hollywood war movie where it's like, you know, Easy Company's doing great, and then one guy, you know, he gets shell shocked, right? And he, you know, has crisis and meltdown. But Tom Hanks is, you know, stoic all the way through, and you know, it's great. Like, I'm not knocking that movie, you know, Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah, they're great movies, right?
That, like, but there's always a nod to that, you know, sort of experience, but at the same time it is dramatized, right, and not in the same way that a movie like Warfare is, right, and obviously literally it's dramatized because it's acting, but you know, but
it you know, like Warfare I think does a really good job of, I actually, you know, was watching that with some mutual friends of ours, and translating what the guys were saying on the radio, and I really appreciated that. That movie did not tell you what the guys were saying to each other. They just let you hear how they were talking. And it took me back, man. I think like 5 minutes in that movie, I was like, oh yeah, no, I still know how to talk like this. Like I could still, I'd be slow and I'd be out of practice, but I definitely could follow what was happening. I was like, that's super cool. And that was kind of stuff I wanted to catch with my book, right? There were these things that like, especially the sort of the atavistic and the exhausting side of, so for the uninformed at that time, in Iraq and Afghanistan, but at this point in the American story of the global war on terror, General Stanley Crystal and General Petraeus had frontlined a large publication called Counterinsurgency, and it was basically the doctrine that we were going to employ to turn around the wars and take over, and you know, manna from heaven and everything would work. And a very sensible thing that I agree with is that you have to be out with the people. You know, you have to be out in their neighborhood. You have to be there with them every day for them to trust you. And that's not to say that like before there's another guy. I have a book. Ghost Riders of Baghdad. I forgot who wrote it, but it's of the guy who's in a different unit in like sort of the brigade that we replaced. And he does a good job of explaining like it was like that before they made counterinsurgency TM, right? But there was a strong emphasis on you will spend all of your time out of the wire. And so we nominally lived in this base called Camp Taji that was like an hour north of Baghdad because that was the only base that had the facilities to maintain our vehicles. But in reality, we just lived on a combat outpost 24/7. And we had a 36-hour patrol cycle. And what that means is you would have 12 hours out in sector doing your patrol. You'd come back, clean your weapons, do all your maintenance, do all your recovery, and then you'd sleep for however long you possibly could, do whatever details you have to do, like kitchen patrol or sort mail, get ready for the next patrol. And then you get put on, so that's 12 hours for rest and recovery. And then you get put on 12 hours for QRF, which is where you're basically it's called QRF for quick reaction force. And your job is to stand by. If somebody needs reinforcements, you're the reinforcements. If somebody needs to be randomly driven across town, like you're that guy. If somebody gets blown up and you have to escort EOD out to do a site exploitation, you're that guy, right? So generally, depending on the day, you'd see anywhere between 12 to 24 hours of like hard labor, right? Walking around with at least 80 pounds of gear, talking to people, constantly moving, constantly walking, constantly, occasionally getting into a firefight, occasionally just get your world getting rocked because something blew up. So those are the kind of things I really wanted to capture, not just the like, yeah, sure, we got in firefights and we had some fun stories to tell that like are nice and Hollywood quality, but for the most part, you're kind of just a cop in a really bad neighborhood.
Hey, folks. This is not an ad, it is a public service announcement. The MacIver Institute is doing big things for the state of Wisconsin. I mean, heck, Bill and I are putting out research pretty much every day on energy, the budget, Medicaid, you name it. Then, there's the great Richard Moore and Dan O'Donnell, who write and create weekly videos for us. And oh yeah, we've even got WISN's Ben Yount, who writes a daily news article on all the biggest Wisconsin stories. Be sure to visit MacIverInstitute.com to stay up to date on everything that's going on. But if you're ever too busy thinking and acting locally, sign up for our weekly newsletter. We'll send the biggest stories straight to your inbox. Sign up at MacIverInstitute.com. Let's get back to the show. Can you talk a little bit about like the culture, what it was like living among these people? Because it's one of the things that you stress in the book was that people don't appreciate the fact that we knew these people really well, the people who lived in this city, and you're in a section of it, right? Is it like a neighborhood or something like that? But like you say in the book, you're like, we gave these kids nicknames, we gave them candy bars, like, and you had some photos in the book, and you're having conversations with these people, but also a little bit later in the book, there's sort of a paradox, a contradiction. On the one hand, they like your presence there. They like you. They interact with you guys. But there's, I guess, a large swath of them that turn on you. Sometimes the same people, maybe, right?
Yeah, man. Yeah.
I guess what the question was what's the culture like, and what's the day to day like, with respect to interacting with these people?
Yeah, well, I would say first, I think like what's the culture like is kind of that's a whole question, right? I think
it is a
I'll say like Middle Eastern.
Actually, we can say
I'll say generally Middle Eastern culture, right? And which is like, and people like I once many moons ago, I was hanging out in Barcelona with some friends of mine, and there was this like Middle Eastern, Mediterranean sort of like food joint that they wanted to go smoke hookah. And like they were like, "Oh, let's go!" And they kind of looked at me like, "Oh no, can we go? Will you be offended?" And I was just like, "Guys, I spent 15 months like trying to help people like this. Like, yes, I'd love to go smoke hookah and eat some shawarma and like chill in a bar. Like, let's go. Like, that sounds like a wonderful time." And so there's this like that in a lot of ways, I think like when you look back on something like the Iraq War. Somebody asked me on Reddit, like I did a really big AMA when I published the book, and somebody asked me, how the war for oil, bad incentives, like it's just people exploiting blah 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 blah. And I think like at any time any war is going to be like that, right? There are going to be a lot of people in power who are just
Yeah.
using it to exploit resources and kind of
Yeah.
get theirs. Um, so like on some level, there's like I actually used to joke that it clearly was not a war for oil, because if it was for a war for oil, it would be done in 6 months, and then somebody would be in charge of the oil fields and we'd be gone, right? But like the fact we stuck around proves that it was just a quagmire of epic proportions beyond oil. And like at the level the book is dealing with, we're not talking about AstraZeneca, like, trying to bribe government officials to get the Ministry of Health contracts or whatever, right? What we're just talking about, like, yeah, here's a neighborhood, it's a lawless hole, and it's run by some really bad people that will like pour acid on your face if you don't wear a burqa, and they'll flay you alive if you narc on them, kind of thing. And by the way, if you want to buy gas, you have to buy it from them, right? It's just like,
Yeah.
and so I tell people like, yeah, if you kind of think about like if the you're hanging out in a town that doesn't have a functioning state, more or less, because we destroyed it, and the closest thing they have to a state is this sort of Italian mob, except they're Arabic, and they're also the Catholic Church, except they're Arabic, right? So it's like if the Italian mob, I guess actually the Russian mob, maybe like the cartoonized modern Hollywood Russian mob is probably a great example, right? Where like you go to your Eastern Orthodox church and the pastor or the priest is definitely also in the mob.
Yeah, he's
Right.
on the
And
team.
so like,
Yeah.
so like your local governor, he's in the mob, and like
Yeah.
the gangster down the street, he runs the mob, right? And then the priest, well, he's in the mob. And so like, so a lot of our job was trying to connect with locals and just trying to like we're just trying to like literally just trying to make sure your streets don't blow up.
Yeah. Well, on this same vein, it's so on the one hand, right, you have pretty good relationships with a lot of these people, but at the same time, you have you call it the Iraqi army, right? Who you guys are, trying to. It's not really the Iraqi. It's a new Iraqi army, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one of the things you talk about is that it's riddled with double agents, with
Absolutely.
moles,
Yeah.
with
So
members of
mhm.
the Almaty militia, and
Yeah,
so
well, in our neck of the woods, yeah.
okay, okay,
So okay, so like this is going to be kind of a hacky that I'm going to tell you my understanding of like kind of how this went. It's going to be really fast and dirty, and there's going to be historians out there who are like, "Well, you're wrong," and I'm like, "Okay, fine." I defer to like go read a book specifically about this, detailing academic quality. But as it was more or less explained to us, and as I remember of that explanation, like basically, and what I've read also, like we invade this country, we deposed Saddam Hussein, we basically just shotgun the entire government into pieces. And if you were a member of the Ba'athist Party, you were not allowed in government. And um, if you were in the military, past some rank at least, certainly if you're in the Imperial Guard, so if you were a trusted official, so if you were like some high-ranking guy, you were not allowed in the military anymore.
mm,
And what that meant was that everybody in the Iraqi army, which we reconstituted as Iraqi army, like nobody had combat experience, nobody had years of experience. You'd have like a major who's been in the army for like 6 months, and like they're just a bunch of volunteers. There's also this thing where like there's like we're providing a lot of money, and this is where you get to a lot of like perverse incentives coming in there, right? Where like we're starting to fund military operations, we're starting to fund a state, where like there's money sloshing around. So if you're going to be, if your country was going back to this conversation, why would somebody in our community join the military, right? For them, it's like, yeah, if you're living in a country where making $3,000 a year is a good paycheck, and then I destroy your country, and then I guarantee you a job where you're going to get paid some amount of money, right? And the underwriter of that paycheck is basically the United States. Like people are going to flock to that. It doesn't matter what the job is, right? And this is also in a country where there's no more police and there's no more functioning law, and so like you might just get waxed on the street because you have the wrong dialect and you're in the wrong part of
mm,
Mosul, right? And so like, yeah, sure, go join the military, and that's a perfectly reasonable reason to join the military. But that leads you to the situation where you have a military, like the dark side, I should say, like what my experience is with like real Arabic culture, right? Sort of like you get into cultural institutions we take for granted, right? So like we're typically in the West, weird, right? Uh, we oppose nepotism. We don't like favoritism. We believe in like there's some due process for something like a contract, right? And when you go to other parts of the world, that's not necessarily how it works, right? So and that's not necessarily to disparage that, but in other parts of the world where things are a lot harder, why wouldn't you help your family? Like, it's amoral for you not to help your family. So you should give your family kickbacks. Or if there's due process in a contract, like it's immoral for you not to help your friend. Why would you not help your friend? Like, why would you go help some schmuck? He hasn't done anything for you, right?
Yeah.
And so that, a lot of what you end up running into, and like, okay, to be clear, as like mostly a specialist during this time as a battlefield secretary, I'm not point man for these types of conversations, right? But I'm a fly on the wall for a lot of them. And you're seeing our officers struggle through this kind of thing of like, okay, well, I have to kind of scratch your back. I have to kind of become your friend. But everybody knows that we're not friends. And everybody knows that at the end of the workday, I'm going to leave. And the people that want to kill me are going to come say hi to you. And they're going to ask you what you told me, right? And so trying to navigate that, trying to get trust, earn trust from people who know that you're going to be gone in a year. For us, it was 15 months, right? And any promises you make are null and void when some next bag shows up. And the people that we're fighting, like, in this case, the Mahdi army, some of these people have good business relationships with the Mahdi army, right? Some people just sell them falafels. I'm like, that's great. Some people have really bad relationships. They don't like the Mahdi army. They think they represent corrupt, kleptocracy that kind of runs half the government, but they'll cut your throat if you speak up against them. So don't speak up against them, right? And that was kind of like, that was this really interesting, to get there. I think to have the sort of 17-year-old, I'm going to get some, man, right? And then to get there and be like, oh, so like really like, that's why I said kind of like being a police officer, right? Like going around and being like, okay, we are trying to defeat this enemy. And to us, they're this enemy. They live in the civilian population. They are civilians. They aren't wearing uniforms. And what got me here was the Iraqi army, right? Sorry.
Right.
I'm like, this is obviously a can of worms. I hope it doesn't mind. But yeah, in our situation, there were 3 major governmental entities that we had to interact with on a regular basis. So there was just the police, right? And the police, we basically never interacted with them. The called the Iraqi police, the IPs. Those were just your beat cops, local neighborhood. You couldn't trust them. They were absolutely dirty. Like you knew for a fact they worked for the Jaish-e-Mahdi. Like they walk around without a mask on, and they're the cops, right? So there's no way that Sheriff Dave is wronging the Russian mob. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And they also live like us. They live in the local neighborhood, so they'll get killed if they go against the grain. But also, like, their boss is Jaish-e-Mahdi, and their politicians are running all Jaish-e-Mahdi, right? So then the United States tried to build something called the National Police, and the idea was that you would create a national police force. I guess you could call it like the FBI, kind of analogous to that, because they're not an investigative branch; they're just an enforcement branch. And the idea was that you would hire Iraqis to be the national police, tell them we're going to save the whole country, and then shuffle them around. So the NPs that were in Baghdad were NPs from like Mosul or from Basra or from Najaf, right? So there's this melting pot of people from all over Iraq. And I think the idea there too is they don't have clan loyalties. So they're not inclined to like help one clan over another. But they also, lived in the local population. Their identities weren't really protected. Like it was pretty easy. Like you could just get somebody to join. Like if the Jaish-e-Mahdi could get enough people to join the NPs that you'd have kind of an NP everywhere, and you'd be able to kind of like, this guy, I know who he is. So we generally couldn't really trust the NPs either. And then there's the Iraqi army. And I think generally you describe them as like very undisciplined, corrupt army, right? And I'm like, fair enough. We destroyed their country. Right? That was just reality. I'm not trying to say that I'm not trying to like basically, whatever.
It's I think people understand that it's not, a country with a long military history and really intact institutions.
Yeah, right.
In order
like
to facilitate sort of.
I'm trying to.
I remember seeing years ago a video of Iraqi army recruits doing jumping jacks.
Right.
They couldn't do jumping jacks. It's something completely foreign, right? They have
right. Well, and they're
basic, and
well, there are a lot of things that go into that too. Like there probably were a lot of people. I've seen the same video, right? And there are probably plenty of people that could do jumping jacks, but they think it's stupid to do jumping jacks. They don't understand why you would do jumping jacks, and quite frankly, why would you do jumping jacks, right? Like we have these things in our military culture. We bring these things like, no, you have ordered military and discipline, right? There's a whole thing. Iraqi army, the tradition in the Arabic military is much more Soviet because was the biggest influence at the time, right? So they had you'd see like a bunch of guys in camo. and they would be your sort of enlisted, and then some officer with like a beret and a nice suit would come over, and he'd be like, "Yes, I'm the platoon leader," right? And you're like, "Okay, that's totally this like Soviet structure and works for them, doesn't work for them." But anyway, what ended up happening was we ultimately a unit, getting back to the book, our unit ended up living on this base called the Old Ministry of Defense. That was literally just the Old Ministry of Defense. We took it over, we built a wall around it, and then became a combat outpost for us. And it's called Cop Old Mod, as we called it. And we shared this base. At that point, the counterinsurgency doctrine had gotten like enough work had been done that the military was really starting to experiment with like, okay, so we're just going to share bases now. And usually there was like the Iraq side of the base, and there was the Iraqi side of the base, and there was the American side of the base. And for us, we had like maybe a quarter of this base, right? And it was a tiny base. We had a helipad, and we had like a couple buildings, and there was like little archways. And then there was the other 3/4 of the base, and that was just the Iraqi army. And we knew for a fact that probably about half of them were Iraqi army. We had gotten those intelligence reports. We also had the benefit because our unit was for certain operations, we were attached to a group called Task Force 17, and that gave us access to like a higher level of intelligence, which is really nice. So we got pretty good. We tended to have pretty good intelligence, not like the cartoons of like army intelligence. And so, like, we had really good intel that, like, yeah, pretty much half the base is just straight up Jai Shalmati, and we all drive to work next to each other on the highway. But that ended up working in our favor because there were so many Jai Shalmati living on our base that we never got mortared on our base. Even during the battle, they did not mortar our base.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, and we had confirmed intel. The reason why they didn't mortar our base is because there was a 3/4 chance that you're going to hit the wrong building.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
So another thing that you mentioned is that the militia didn't, obviously they didn't care if they killed you guys, but they didn't care if they killed civilians. They did care if they killed their own guys. That's something.
I would color it more nuanced. I think
if it was it more that like if it happened, it happened, but they weren't, seeking it out, right? It wasn't just like, screw these people, we'll mow them all down to
I think the Konrad that wrote the book would tell you they didn't give a shit, right?
Mhm.
At best, what you just described, like if it happens, it happens. I think looking back, having read a lot more about the conflict, having read other people's accounts, and like especially criticisms of counterinsurgency doctrine or what happened, there was this whole other thing, by the way. Like during the troop surge, there was this basically civil war that was going on in Iraq between the different clans, and it basically had nothing to do with the invasion. So like there was this whole parallel play happening, right? Where like different factions were trying to take over the government that we weren't even engaging with. And so I'm confident, like looking back, that a lot of that was more that there were certain neighborhoods that Josh Shamari probably knew that like the clans that were prevalent there or the specific people there, they cared less about. And they also knew like strategic realities. There are certain areas that like if you start what precipitated the 2008 Battle of Sadr City, the thing that made Americans really come to the game was that they started shooting rockets at the green zone, right? Which is kind of funny. Like when I first heard that, which later in the book, like it blew my mind that like that, what? Like that. So all of this, we lost almost every checkpoint at the east side of the city. There's a total uprising. Like half of the Iraqi army has deserted. There's a full-blown gunfights in the streets. People are taking armored vehicles against American troops. That's like, we don't really care, but you shot rockets at the green zone, right? And that's, so Jai Shamati was also aware of that kind of stuff. Like, so there was certainly indiscriminate violence, especially when you get to the battle, right? But when you're talking about, like just humdrum run of the mill, right? One of the things they would do is they'd go out when you fire mortars or indirect fire, the process tends to look like if you're in a defensive position, you go out, take a mortar tube, you put it where you're going to put it, right? You shoot a couple rounds where you're going to shoot it. You keep track of where the mortar tube is pointing and what your inclination is and everything, right? And you zero in known firing points. And then later, when somebody's walking and you know where they are in reference to that known firing point, you're going to go put that mortar tube exactly where you put it. You're going to put it like set it up exactly you had it, and then like shift right 10 and drop 5, right? And that's going to put you on the money. And the Jai Shamati had done that for every neighborhood surrounding Sadr City. And so one of the largest threats that we had would you just be like on a foot patrol one of their outposts, like one of their lookouts would call and say, "Hey, I got a dismounted guys walking through the junkyard. Go to like, whatever their version of set up RP3, look at this is where they're going drop 5, right?" And then we would have random indirect fire would come in. What these guys would do is they'd roll up in a sedan, they'd throw an 80 millimeter mortar tube on the ground, they'd set it up, and they'd shoot a bunch of rounds, and they'd run away.
Yeah.
And the whole thing would be done before a helicopter could come on station, and then you can't react to combat, right? When they're doing that, I'm confident that the Jai Shamati would have considered time of day, who's there, right? Like I think what the Jai Shamati strategically would have wanted to do is if they're coming into a neighborhood, they don't want to just murk a bunch of kids if they can avoid it. What they want to do is come in after the Americans have left and their patrol is over and go into your house and be like, "Hey, Michael, so I noticed that like you were talking to the Americans for 30 minutes. Right. Like there are these stories we heard from people, for example, like kind of casual war crime stuff, right? But like there were certain units that were pretty S tier type units, right? That like when they would interrogate a guy and like the guy wasn't playing ball, like one of the ways you could like enact justice if you wanted to was like give him a water bottle and let him out of your striker in a bad part of town, pat him on the back, give him a hug and drive away, right? And just make it look like he got the red carpet treatment. And like, cause enough idiots would do that and get people killed. That like, that was this, like, there's this whole thing. So what I'm trying to say there is that like, you're in this environment where everything you're doing is being watched and where there are these machinations upon machinations of like what the Jai Shamati is doing. So yeah, 20-year-old Konrad would have been like, they didn't give a shit. And like, now I'm like, oh no. Like force through the trees. There was a whole military apparatus there. They had something like, once I've heard they have north 300,000 people in some degree in the Mahdi army in Baghdad. And there was also a group within that called the Special Groups, which were trained by the Iranian Kids Force by Soleimani. And those guys were like, those were skilled people, right? World-class snipers, guys who really knew how to do anti-tank tactics, the guys who really knew how to set up ambushes. Yeah. And so when we got in the thick of it, like the way that ended up happening was a large group of basically what you'd consider essentially the Army reserves would show up. We would hit a roadside bomb that had been in place a long time ago. They'd pay off a government contract. They would pay off contractors that we would pay to fix the roads. They'd go there and pay them money to put bombs into the roads. And then all they would have to do is wire up a detonator. Boom, we get a near ambush. Now you're surrounded by 20 dudes that are shooting at you with AK-47s. Those, that's like little Mahmoud. He's not really a trained fighter. But then there would be this shift depending on like how long you were engaged and what was happening. There'd typically be this shift where you would start noticing like, oh no, we are getting shot at. Like the special groups is here now, right? And that would be they're trying to use an RPG to take out your vehicle. Like you might hit an IED that disables a vehicle that kind of like forces you to get into a defensive posture. Now you're in like a small arms engagement that's just sort of like, okay, we're reacting to contact. And then you start really bullets are flying near your head, and then an RPG really hits the vehicle that they wanted to hit. And that's how the Jai Shamati would operate in this environment.
Okay. I kind of want to fast forward just a little bit because there are some questions I want to ask you about when your time in the Army ends. So fast forwarding a bit, you're at this point, you're a pretty hardened veteran. You've seen lots of action. There's one moment in this book where you get into a battle with a sniper. And it really stood out to me. I'm going to find something, but can you clue us in as to your mindset, what was going on there, and where are you? You're at Outpost Gumby.
Yeah.
What is Outpost Gumby?
Yeah. So I'll set up the sort of tactical situation and like I think the thing that makes the story extra absurd is that I was a machine gunner. Like I was not a sniper.
Yeah. Okay. I don't think we mentioned that. You're no longer specialist. On the radio, you're a machine gunner now, right?
Yeah. Still with the rank of specialist, but like
but no longer radio.
Machine gun team leader, and which with our manpower constraints just meant I was a dude with a machine gun, and to catch up to speed, the 2008 Battle of Sadr City started with there were these road checkpoints we had for major points of egress into this district called Sadr City. We knew the Sadr City had a huge cache cache of weapons and ammunition, and the Jai Shamati was really well supplied. And so for most of our deployment, our strategy really was just to starve them out. So we were trying to interdict traffic going into the city, trying to stop munitions from going into the city. Many years later, I would learn that like that seems to have been a very effective technique, and they mostly were operating on cached reserves.
Mm.
And then completely unrelated, the Jai Shamani operating in the south and Basra had successfully taken over Basra. They kicked out the British forces that were there. They couldn't hold it anymore. Like the British couldn't hold it anymore. So there's a whole reorganization, and it was the first independent Iraqi operation where it was only the Iraqi army. And basically we told them like, all right, your big kid pants are on, go take back Basra. Right. So there's a whole other story there that I'd love to learn more about how the Iraqi army took Basra. Unfortunately, there's kind of like it's behind a veil of ignorance because we didn't have any American troops there. It wasn't even supervised. They were just sort of like, go, this is your chance to shine because we want to be done here. And the Jai Shamati, that was a major, that's basically where the money came from. There's oil fields in Basra and like taking cream off the top. That was apparently what funded the Jai Shamati. And there was this whole, there's also an election that was happening at the time. So there's this kind of like 4D chess thing that's going on where there's a battle in the south that's threatening to take away the Jai Shamati's money. The Jai Shamati is also facing like they're on all three sides. They're not getting resources through Baghdad anymore. And then Muqtada al-Sadr, the guy who was running the Mahdi army, he did a spiritual retreat to Iran, and left his first in command. And I think the version of that I heard was essentially that his first in command was a very anti-coalition guy. He was really into the Jai Shamati should take over the country. And so he left that guy to start a huge uprising. And I think the idea was that 6 months of conflict would go by, and then Muqtada al-Sadr would come back and negotiate peace and then be the good guy, and then he could be elected as president or whatever. That did not happen. What ended up happening was on the first day, the Jai Shamati had their uprising. Actually, it was kind of wild. I talk about this in my book. We were going to do a raid that night, and we ended up calling it off because the UAVs saw that like there was a lot of activity on the ground. Turned out they were just pulling all their guns out of the holes. They took over every single checkpoint. They just seized every checkpoint that we had set up. The Iraqi army was running at that point. They had surrounded a lot of combat outposts in the area, and just like overnight, the entire city was just like, oh, everything we've worked on all year is gone. Like these guys are just in the streets. And going back to the fact that like the Iraqi army was mostly corrupt in our combat outpost, I mean, like nobody showed up. Literally the first day of that, like everybody was gone. And so all of a sudden, a tiny group of people that we left behind at the combat outpost had to protect this outpost that was huge. And concurrently, like because of that, the Iraqi army who were already double agents, they just took the tanks and the BMPs and the light armored vehicles and just like went back to Sadr City, right? So we got this like day one, we get this intel. We're just like, hey, you need to be ready to like go ham against like heavy armored troop carriers and T-73 tanks and stuff. Or I don't know, they're T-73s, but like whatever it was, like the leftover Saddam Hussein era, Russian tank. And that was a hell of a thing. So that then leads to this like 4 or 5 day quagmire, basically playing whack-a-mole in this area that we knew as It had a completely different name. But like for various reasons.
Oh, that was another thing that stood out to me. So this neighborhood that you guys are referring to as you discover is not actually
Yeah. So
you when you're trying to talk to locals and ask them, gather intelligence, they're like, that's not here. And no one knows. There's just
it's
bad
like,
map.
If you can imagine that, like some officer just gets somewhere in Baghdad and he goes like, hey, what's this neighborhood? So we tell them, hey, you're in Arlington. And he goes, okay, what's that neighborhood over there? And like sees you waving your hand, and the interlocutor then says like, oh, Baltimore, right? So then you call Washington D.C. Baltimore. That's basically what happened, right? They're like, we were our maps, our tactical maps, we inherited them from the unit that came before us. They inherited it from the unit that came before them. And at some point, somebody invaded Baghdad and was just like, where are we? And they're like, we are in the neighborhood of Shab. And like, well, where's over there? And somebody was like, that is Ur. Ur is 30 minutes north. It's the ancient city of Ur, 30 minutes north of Baghdad. So we called this little pizza slice junkyard third world slum area that was bordering Sadr City. We called it Ur, to the confusion of everybody we interacted with there. It had some real name. The Terps knew the name. I didn't know the name. But anyway, so we all this entire area now is just we're going up and down this entire front on like the northwest side of Sadr City, which looks like a big chessboard, kind of like sideways.
Okay.
And we're essentially just getting ambushed and reacting to combat. Like totally don't have the initiative. We're just trying to go between these checkpoints and reseize checkpoints and reseize terrain. So we go up to a checkpoint over here, and there'd be everybody, all the Iraqi army guys were there, were just killed, and then we'd seize it. We'd wait for the Iraqi army to show up. We'd go south to another checkpoint, and then we'd find like, okay, half the Iraqi army guys were killed, and then new unit shows up to replace them. And we find out, okay, the unit up north has all abandoned their post because they're scared, or the Jaish Ahmadi told them to run away. So we go up there, right? Find out there's a tank that's up in. So this whole section of the book where I'm just describing this 4.5-day quagmire of not sleeping and just playing whack-a-mole and getting blown up randomly, right? Then we repositioned the powers that be. So the Jaish Ahmadi started shooting rockets at the green zone, as I mentioned. I didn't know that at the time. Some powers that be decided that, okay, we need to regroup. The unit that has been on the front lines is going to spearhead the attack into Sadr City. So we all gathered our forces on what then became the front lines, a place called Route Florida, which is the southeast of the city. And we pushed in what felt like, 10 miles. And it was, I think, 2 kilometers. And so there's this, God, where am I? Right. So now we're talking about like now at this point in the battle, that's where we're actually assaulting into the city, and we're just going block by block. And this is a city that has had at this point 5 years of time to entrench. And so every road, every building has weapons in it. They have an entire defensive posture. And so, we fought like hell for 2 kilometers. And this whole thing up to here, I think that took another couple of days. Basically, by the end of 2 weeks of this conflict, we had killed something like half of the entire Jaish Ahmadi in Baghdad. We'd killed just an enormous amount, and not just us. Like,
what were the estimates? How many were there approximately? Is it in the tens of thousands? How big is the city? What's the population?
I don't really know how to like gauge the population. I've heard that it goes up to like 2 million.
Okay.
The cities, I think it's like something like, I don't know, like a 10 kilometer by 10 kilometer square. I could pull up Google Earth, right? It's not very big, but it's very dense. They don't have like residential. So the city was built by Saddam Hussein as sort of a token to the UN to be like, no, I'm not killing all the Shiites. Look, I built them an entire city. And then as soon as the world court wasn't looking, they were like, and now your power's turned off. Have a nice day, right? So it's just like this big, that's why it's a grid. It's just this big slum. Kind of like a city of God in Brazil type thing, right? Where it's just like there's this manufactured city. They moved a bunch of Shiites into it, forced relocated them, and it has since just become this big sprawling city. It has these large boulevards that cut between major blocks, and the major blocks have like little alleyways in between them. So from the assaulting perspective, this looks like you just have a 5-lane boulevard with like a median garden, and like on either side of you is just like a Rubik's cube of small trenches, and like, if you go into a building, every building that you can see anything, any dominating firing position, the Jaish Ahmadi knew what you could see from that building. Right? So I get into this in the Thunder Run. We get up in this large overwatch position where we could see a good part of the city, but they knew everything that we could see. So when we were up there in our machine gun position, all we're seeing is unarmed guys moving between buildings. But then as soon as our vehicles come anywhere near those firing positions, bam, RPG hits our vehicle. HVID blows up, like buries a vehicle. EFP goes off, right? And at no point in time are we given engageable targets for the rules of engagement. So then that leads to further in the book, we had a big paradigm shift. This was like the thing that made Sadr City was that they actually changed our rules of engagement. And what was conveyed to us was generally basically like any military age males that looked like they're participating in the conflict, and any person that is clearly displaying hostile intent. So if you like some woman is walking across the street with a bunch of RPGs, like go ahead and wax her, right? Which like nominally is not like, if you look at it legally, it's not like a big change, but like the attitude shift of basically like, no, we're going to go ham, and like being allowed to take, like there was this element at that point in the war where you don't have by law, basically you don't have the initiative. You're waiting to get shot at essentially. And no officer,
they have to engage you before you can counter.
Right. Then and no flag officer is going to tell you that was like Stanley Crystal, for example. I've heard him just outright say like, that was not what we wanted. I would have never said that. But because of the legal institutions at play and sort of the incentives operating on officers, that became the de facto rules of engagement on the ground. Like if you, unless you could prove for certain, like that guy had a gun, I saw him, I waxed him, I was in danger. Right. Fun fact, actually, that ended up being a thing. We ran into that. Like when the battle ended, we ended up having a whole weird transition of like, okay, well, we were going ham. Like literally, just we were in formation with tanks, shooting tank rounds into buildings, and like the next day, it's like, okay, well now Smile and Wave, like those rules aren't enforced anymore. Which I don't like. By the way, I'm not complaining about that per se. It's just that was part of the psychological experience that I try to explain in the book of just
Yeah.
um,
You have actually here's a passage where you talk about the rules and engagement. And you talk about their importance, right? And the reason you have them instituted. Hopefully, this is the right spot. When we venture to the ends of the earth to vanquish the enemies of our ideals, we keep those ideals close at heart so we can return as their champions. That's why we have them. Were we to otherwise gain victory by force alone, purely for the sake of winning, having abandoned the very values for which we have waged a war, we would have achieved nothing. It would be nothing more than brutes. In the end, these deals are a personal challenge we set for ourselves, proclaiming that we can win in a war without losing our honor, which I think sums it up nicely. Because I remember, being in high school, me and one of my buddies, he was gearing up, training to be a Navy SEAL. I was teaching him how to swim. He was teaching me how to lift. He's like, I don't understand why we don't just give all our soldiers roids. Like just let them, blow stuff up and, why are we doing all this stuff? But I think you explained very nice, very nice.
yeah.
Well, maybe there's an argument for getting them all juiced up, but he went much further than that.
I mean, like I'm actually pretty partial. Like this is gonna sound wild. Like I think it's a known fact generally, like unofficial known fact. Basically, every SOF unit in the United States military is on juice, right? They're just totally on gear, and that is not to say that I have a problem with that. It's not to say that I'm disparaging them in any way, right? I mean, like you got guys like would take Navy SEALs that aren't even in Dev Group, right? Like just, and I'm not saying that, like there's some hierarchy of Navy SEALs, but like everyone thinks Dev Group, everyone thinks like SEAL Team 6, but just take some quote unquote run of the mill Navy SEAL, right? Somebody who can crawl into the tube of a fast attack nuclear submarine at like 200 feet below sea level. And the tube that they barely fit into is filling up with literally freezing cold water. And they're going to swim 20 miles so they can peek their head out of a river, laze a building that we're going to blow up with a cruise missile. And then, like, if anybody sees them and slit some throats, crawl back into the river and crawl and like swim back into the torpedo tube of a hidden fast attack submarine, right? Like, I'm okay with that person being on gear, man. Like I don't care. This isn't like ethics in sports. Like, no, that I'm sorry, but just so that's a whole diatribe, right? But what were we talking about?
But anyway, we were talking about rules of engagement. You
Yeah.
said, why do we have all these rules, right? They should be more lax. And
Yeah,
we must have obviously been talking about like you have to be engaged first before you can actually.
Yeah, I guess we're with the run the off ramp.
It came up at the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah. The off ramp there would be that, like, we probably don't want all of our high school football players on gear, right? But I'm okay with Navy SEALs being on gear, and I think that kind of goes to this. Yeah, things change. I think. But in that section of the book, one of the things I'm really wrestling with, which I had no formal training or like, well, I had formal training in the rules of engagement, right? But I didn't have like political philosophy undergraduate education or anything.
Yeah.
I didn't have like the knowledge of ethics. I just was really figuring this out. That's what you're reading in the book is like when we're in a city like that, there were millions of people around. There's this wild thing, and I think you run into a certain type of person when you come back who, like a woman once called me a baby killer. I hadn't even been deployed yet. A woman in an airport wearing a like golf visor called me a baby killer at the SeaTac airport once. And I was like, what are we like? Okay. And like, I think what people don't take for granted is like, you literally cannot be in that situation and not think about the fact that there are families huddled in these buildings around you. And that was something that Jaish Mahdi would use tactically against us, right? So they knew we had rules of engagement, like very strict rules of engagement. They knew what our rules of engagement were. So like one of their tactics, one of their go-to tactics was to go into a building and have everybody in the building huddle on the roof. So entire families, 2 or 3 families, will just be sitting on the roof of the building at gunpoint. And that's so that when our Apache helicopters flying overhead, they can't shoot the building, right? Because you have to shoot through a rooftop of confirmed non-combatants to hit suspected combatants. And Yeah, we ran into those types of situations, and the things I start talking about in the book are like, the paradigm shift I was talking about, the Battle of Sadr City, was the realization of like, okay, they knew our rules and they were using those rules. There are these times I talk about just literally watching a guy shoot an RPG at one of our vehicles, and I don't have def light on him, right? Like I can't engage this guy. I can't see him, but I see the RPG come out. I see the guy walk into a building. I see an RPG fly out of the building, hit one of our vehicles. And I see like later he walks out of that building into a different building. And then later I see another RPG fly in that same building. So like I know what's happening. I could totally grease the guy, right? And the question is, there's a UAV watching me right now, and my platoon sergeant is right there. And if my squadron commander sees just some dude walking between buildings just get gassed, I have to explain that, right? Like that's and not only do I have to explain that, I have to explain that like in a court of law, and it's good. They're going to get down to. I've been in an escalation of force investigation, and they get down to literally, where were you? How far away were you? Right? And I try to get at that at the book too, of just like this at all times, knowing that if you shoot the wrong person at the wrong time, uh, everybody in your chain of command is going to have a very, very bad time trying to parse that out. And you're going to be held to a standard of what happened way higher than I think was reasonable. And that was basically what they turned off in the Battle of Sadr City. They're like, we're basically old school engagement. It was like Fallujah. It was like Ramadi. And the veterans in our unit who had been to those two battles were just like, oh yeah, no, like it's real. This is as real as it gets. Right? And when you're there, like what I'm going back to, of like you can't forget that I just watched, because the streets clear out like in an old Western movie. Nobody wants to be outside when people are going ham with machine guns, right? And like you see the families come out at 6 a.m, look at the damage, try to see if their car is still drivable, go see if they can find food for the next day, and then crawl back into their building because the Jai Shamani tipped everybody off. They're like, hey, we're going to attack in 30 minutes. And if you tell them, we'll kill you. Right.
Yeah.
And that's why the streets all clear out. And you see that in the movie Warfare does a great job of illustrating how that all works, goes down.
Hey, folks, this is not an ad. It is a public service announcement. The MacIver Institute is doing big things for the state of Wisconsin. I mean, heck, Bill and I are putting out research pretty much every day on energy, the budget, Medicaid, you name it. Then there's the great Richard Moore and Dan O'Donnell, who write and create weekly videos for us. And oh yeah, we've even got WISN's Ben Yount, who writes a daily news article on all the biggest Wisconsin stories. Be sure to visit MacIverInstitute.com to stay up to date on everything that's going on. But if you're ever too busy thinking and acting locally, sign up for our weekly newsletter. We'll send the biggest stories straight to your inbox. Sign up at MacIverInstitute.com. Let's get back to the show. Do you feel today that the rules of engagement are, I guess, hamstringing soldiers? Are they? Do you still think they're an obstacle preventing us from accomplishing our missions?
Well, I think the purpose of rules engagements are to hamstring soldiers. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. That's the purpose, right? They are the restraint. I, rather than focus, like back when I was 20, I definitely would sit here and be like, let's talk about how stupid rules engagements are, right? And why they're inapplicable in our circumstances. I think what I would say now is that's looking at the symptom and not the cause. I think that the rules of engagement need to be informed by the, if you're going to have a von Clausewitz style, the means of, the war is an extension of politics kind of thing, right? Like if you're going to have that, you need to have a strategic objective in mind, and your rules of engagement need to be associated closely with that strategic objective. I think from a policy perspective, if nation building is your strategic objective, you should probably be fired. And I think that you should consider that like your strategic objectives should be what we'd say in the military, actionable or accomplishable, right? Like, and I don't think there was anything, I think in hindsight, I don't think there was anything about the Iraq war from top to bottom that was where there was a clear mission that was communicated and accomplishable. On lower levels, we had missions that were accomplishable, right? But they were in service to very vague, we need to secure this area. Like, what does that mean? Right. And there are other like political philosophical ideas that have been introduced to sense of understanding, like, okay, when you start talking about counterinsurgency, this goes into the long-standing, like the going back to Vietnam and the French engagement in Vietnam, and even back in the Philippines, right? This idea that when you start fighting a counterinsurgency war, the counterinsurgency tactics start dominating fundamentally change the way your military works, and it's a different kind of conflict. So in our situation, like, yeah, we're not fighting a Westphalian nation state who's participating in uniformed rules of combat, right?
Yeah.
And that's not to say that the people that we're fighting were not identifiable a lot of the times, right? But they're not in the same that we have this artifice, like our uniforms. The purpose is not just to hide in the woods; it's to indicate these are Americans, right? And those are Germans, because that's the thing you don't want to like confuse. Um, and the I think in that circumstance, I think like the real criticism comes into like, well, why were we there? What were we trying to accomplish? And is it appropriate for the United States to be in that situation? But in that conflict, I would say that I think that our rules of engagement, I think there was a deep strategic flaw. I think there's a leadership failure and a strategy failure, and in kind of an economic incentive structure failure to understand how the specific rules of engagements we were given were not accomplishable as they were given, and how they would become what they became, right? Because they're sort of like the official rules of engagement seem pretty reasonable, but like, what are you actually doing? And actually, the way the book is set up, the way I set up STRYKER is that you have To the Gates of Babylon. One of the reasons that chapter is in there was really to give everyone like, no, you get a 2-week bender of legalese. Like you sit down and you get your 3-hour lecture on the rules of engagement, right?
Mhm.
And it was even clear back then that like, it's not just so that I know the rules of engagement. It's so that guys like Stanley McChrystal can say, you knew the rules of engagement. That's not what I said. But then you get out there and you realize like there was this famous case that had made its way around the unit. So I don't know if this is Googleable. I haven't looked into it ever since, but there was this pretty famous case. There were a couple high profile rules of engagement, like murder cases that went up. And one of them was, there were some infantrymen. I think they were in Baghdad. They may have been in a different city. Whatever, they were I remember the tactical situation was very clear, because that's what we cared about, right? Was how do we not become these schmucks? And there was a specialist, his team leader, his squad leader, his platoon sergeant, his platoon leader, and the company commander had all been relieved of command. And the lower ranking guys that were in the room with him all went to prison. And what happened was they had entered a building and there was a guy that had an AK, well, there were a couple people that had AK-47s. When you enter into a room, it's like every room is this very intense 3-second battlefield, right? Like you 4 guys file in, you're in the room in less than a second if you're doing your job right. It might take you a second and a half if you're kind of blumbering. Everyone has their sectors of fire. You see a guy with a gun, you shoot him, right? If you see any kind of threat, you call it out. And this whole thing takes seconds. And in this engagement, one of the guys had come through the room and he saw a guy with an AK, claps him, guy falls on the ground. So they have a couple dying people in the room. And this one guy with the AK, well, there's many people with AKs, but this one particular person is still very much has the AK and still in his dying breath trying to like continue the fight. And so the squad leader said, apocryphally, finish him. And that was like the thing. And so this guy, bam, shoots him, they move on, right? And this isn't a big deal. This would have never been a thing except for the fact that they had captured a couple enemy prisoners of war, EPWs. When that happens, there's this whole legal fiction that had to happen in Iraq where you have to write you have to handwrite 3 affidavits in triplicate of everything that happened in the mission. You have to take pictures of everything that was on the site. You have to take everything, all the evidence, you have to put it in front of the guy and take a picture. And all this purpose was that because there was a sovereign country, we had to hand this information over to the Iraqi government. And the Iraqi government, their court system would decide whether or not this person was a criminal or not. So we would take any prisoners of war. If they had intelligence value, we'd send them off to be questions or interrogated or whatever. But if they didn't, then we'd hand them over to the Iraqi government and say, hey, this guy's a terrorist. Right? We're not a terrorist. He's a militiaman. He's an insurgent. So in that process, these affidavits included this, like, yeah, we went in a room. There was 3 guys with guns. We shot them. And there was one guy that survived. We took him as an prisoner of war. And multiple people had mentioned this thing where the squad leader said, finish him. Right? They're just trying to be diligent, explain what happened. And everyone went to prison because finish him was considered to be murderous intent that went on beyond the moment of the fight. And this gets really interesting because if you're in like open field maneuvers, like in the law of armed conflict, generally like there's this notion called the limit of advance. If you have like 5 people abreast and they're moving in this textbook through the woods, right? That's your limit of advance. And the way you kind of heuristic is that everything in front of you is the Wild West and everything behind you is the United States, right? So like if you shoot somebody and they're still fighting and you shoot them, but you haven't passed them, the limited advance hasn't passed them, then that's a good clean kill. If you pass that guy, turn around and shoot him, you've murdered him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this situation in this room had the very similar effect. They had nominally secured the room. There were other things they could have done with this guy. If you're just looking at it as one room, there are other things you could do. You could walk over, you could kick the gun out of his hand, you could do whatever, right? And instead, the squad leader said, finish him. They moved to the next room. Now, of course, we're just going to forget that like these guys were in a multi-room engagement, that there were bad guys in the next room as there were bad guys in the previous room. There are other rooms being cleared. There's an entire tactical scenario. And in that situation, I would argue it's not the right call to start faffing around with some guy's gun. Maybe he has a hand grenade and he's just trying to pull you over. That was a thing that happened a lot in Fallujah. Guys would pretend to be dying to get Marines to come up, and then they would, oh, surprise, I got a grenade, get fucked. Right. And so that's where I think this is where the rules of engagement start breaking down in that conflict, and why there was so much animosity for it in the global war on terror, because we're specifically fighting people who are aware of those rules and they're trying to use those rules tactically against us.
Yeah.
And in Sadr City, actually, after we'd fought the whole battle, I ended up talking to this guy when I went back. At one point, I was back at CP and I was talking to an intel guy, and he was explaining how they'd interrogated some people that were captured. And there was this metal line that was going around where some guy who was being interrogated, some kids force trained special groups guy, just said like he had surrendered. And they were like, well, why'd you surrender? And he was like, we didn't think you'd fight like this. And so the interrogator apocryphally was like, well, what do you mean fight like this? And he's like, you like us, it's like just whatever you got to do. And anyway, yeah, so this is the fun, happy content of the book. So yeah, I mean, so it's going back.
So the critical thing is not rules of engagement per se, but you knowing that they know that you know that they know that you know that they know the rules of engagement, and that sort of infinite thing. They're aware of these rules and extorting you with them.
I think here, what I think the value of like the listeners of a podcast like this. Here's what I think I would say. It's kind of what I say these days, which is, I think Americans need to decide if they want a military that can do what we want our military to do, or if they want a military that looks like the military we want to have, right? If we want to have, and I think it's very poignant with sort of the LGBTQ sort of like characterization of the modern military. If you want to have a military that is handing out MREs and feeding little kids and like, doing aid work in Haiti, that's great, man. Cool. Like, you need to have very strict rules of engagement. If you want a military that's we're going to take the reservists and send them to Chicago during a riot, absolutely, you need to train those people on rules of engagement, right? If you want to have a military where we're having guys can swim out of torpedo tubes to slit throats in some country on the far side of the world 24/7, that's a different kind of military, right? And that's a different kind of war. And I think the question there becomes, what do we want to do with our military, and what do we want them to accomplish? Like, is this the same tool? There was a really good TED Talk that went around 2005-ish, 2006-ish by this guy, Dan Barnett, coincidentally the name of the squadron commander in my unit. But I think his name was Dan Barnett. It was a TED Talk. It's probably one of the best strategic TED Talks I've ever seen. And this guy just goes up and pontificates on how we should completely restructure the Department of Defense. It's like, we bring back the Department of War, restructure the Department of Defense. There's going to be the Department of War is the thing we use to go kill people. The Department of Defense is what we use to like nation build and make the world a better place. And he like goes through all the soft groups and he goes through all the different branches and he puts them in the different Department of War versus Department of Defense. But his like big takeaway was like, you need to realize that like what we have right now is this big lumbering hammer, and we're just using this hammer. And sometimes we want this hammer to hand out MREs, and sometimes we want this hammer to just go hunt down Osama bin Laden. And it's obviously way more nuanced than that. But in our situation, right, like I said, I've said a couple times now, like we basically were like police officers. Not really, because there wasn't like, we weren't enforcing local Iraqi law, but like we generally were doing a similar thing to like a beat cop. Way intense, but like, going around peacemaking, talking to locals, interrogating people, searching houses, looking for evidence. We have military police, right? And why are we not using military police for that job? Ostensibly, military police are trained with that kind of thing. And one of the things I didn't really appreciate as much when I was younger was a lot of the reservists that joined the conflict that were in the battle with us. We were not impressed. Obviously, we're like Steely Ed combat veterans or whatever. We were not very impressed with their performance when like it was a force on force kinetic engagement. But as soon as the wall went up, which is one of the big things we were building, so when we built the wall, we got control of the situation and we started rebuilding locals, helping locals in the area we'd secured and trying to rebuild the city that had been destroyed. Like, they shined, right? These guys were contractors. They were like small business owners from Minnesota. They're like these guys that like, and so they took it on themselves to be like, okay, we're going to have a mentorship program and we're going to help these people rebuild the city.
Yeah.
And it just really shows a completely different, I think, like a different attitude. And I think no, like, oftentimes I'm left the impression that I think politically Americans don't want to have, well, like, okay, I got this award. I got an Army Commendation for Valor when I was there. And when it was originally submitted, I'm like not just trying to like, oh, no, but like when it was submitted, it was because in the book I explained the situation where there was a 36-hour counterattack in our position. We were behind enemy lines, and I was a machine gunner. I was the forward dismounted machine gunner at the main on foot avenue of approach. And so I spent 36 hours just on that machine gun, and then I went and crashed out for a couple hours, and then I woke up and I did another 24-hour engagement or something, and I crashed out and I did another 12. And my original medal award was put in for that. Put in for, hard dick pipe hitter running machine gun, mowing people down in the finest traditions of the United States Army. And I was rejected by the multinational division Iraq because they didn't want to give awards for killing people or for doing direct engagements. And so on the advice of some person somewhere, somebody who was responsible for my award rewrote my entire award to fabricate something about how, well, not fabricate, but to just say, in the finest traditions, his heroic actions saving 3 squad leaders in the blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, so it's like on another block down the road, there was some unit that was being engaged. And because I was engaging these guys here, I managed to save those people. And that's what you're allowed to get an award for. But you're not allowed to get an award for this guy was a hard dick pipe hitter, stayed up for 36 hours and mowing people down, right? Which and by the way, I'm painting with broad strokes. I'm not trying to make it sound like I'm some got some. But the point of the story is that kind of perverse incentive structure. I think that was the biggest thing I got disillusioned with the whole war. That was just top to bottom. I think that was the biggest thing that really opened my eyes. I don't know that I think I go really hard on rules of engagement. I definitely don't go into the bureaucratic wonkery that was just how that war was prosecuted.
Yeah, there are little bits here and there, and I'm like, I can imagine Konrad saying this in person. I think I know where you take it, but I want to ask you a couple more questions. So, eventually you leave the Army and you're discharged. Will you explain what happened, what that process was like, and adjusting back to civilian life?
Yeah. Yeah, man. Okay, so we deployed for 15 months. That was a really long time. It was long enough that my whole world shifted, and I was willing to stay another 6 months just to get another combat PIP. Right. So I think it was another 3 months to get another combat PIP, whatever it was. It just whatever. I've just gone native. I'm not really and go back to Berlin. We go back to Germany. There was this whole thing where when you're, we say OCONUS, when you're not in the continental United States, if you're stationed abroad, so we're stationed in Germany, I think it's a 2-year rotation, or back then it was a 2-year rotation. By the way, quick caveat, I don't know what the rules are. I've been out for a long time, right? But it was 2 years, and then you had to put in a formal request to stay abroad if you wanted to stay in an OCONUS position. So if you're in Japan, or you're in Germany, or you're in Italy, right? Every 2 years you got to say, I'd love to stay. And they're going to let you stay because it's really expensive to fly somebody to a different unit. And most of our unit had put in, this is really common. Most of our unit had put in no, we want to stay. And as the apocryphal story was told to me, some person up at Red Mental HQ just forgot to file the giant stack of paperwork by the time we got back. So we were there for a year and a half. Then we all got deployed. That kind of lost this paperwork. So in Iraq, we all had to write our little essay on why we wanted to stay in Germany when we got back. It got sent to Germany, and some guy just never filed it. So nobody except for the married soldiers who were there for an extra year, or somebody with family dependents with them, they all got to stay for another year. But basically, if you were a single soldier and you put in that request in Iraq, you went somewhere else. So there's this huge diaspora of guys. I ended up in a unit in Texas called the Army Evaluation Task Force. It was just some weird unit made by Dick Cheney to test future combat weapon systems. And that was a whole, lamb to the slaughter of like military appropriations and acquisitions and stuff. So that's like a whole other thing I could, there's an hour conversation with that whole thing. But during that time, I started to, I had a pretty severe traumatic like PTSD. Like just things come up in a way that like, when you're deployed, you don't really notice. And so I was really struggling with that. I had post-concussion syndrome. I had a traumatic brain injury from getting blown up by a roadside bomb, which was kind of funny because it seemed like a non-event would happen. It was pretty early on, but it caused some weird brain damage. I ended up having a migraine condition and like a bunch of like memory issues. And then I had something called post-concussion syndrome, which is where you have a traumatic brain injury that causes hormone imbalances, which cause clinical depression. And I was really going through it. So when I was in Texas, I ended up getting medically discharged and was put on temporary retirement leave for a while until eventually I was found not fit for duty. And then I was a civilian, right? And that like, yeah, that kind of stuff, those types of transitions, those like hard cut transitions are always wild, because then I was just living in my hometown, hanging out with my parents.
Yeah. There wasn't, I don't know that this would happen, but there wasn't an opportunity for you to just say be flown to Kuwait where it's safe, but you're still with your buddies and sort of instead of being thrown back into LA, which is a chaotic and sorry, I don't live there.
I mean, yeah, no, totally.
A chaotic, terrible, disgusting, filthy place to live.
Yeah, not as much back in 2013, but
not as bad as Sadr City.
It's actually kind of funny. One of our guys he grew up in Oakland. He's a white dude that grew up in Oakland, and there's a really funny,
Actually, it's not that rare. Berkeley's right next to Oakland. So.
Yeah, right. But he like real working class dude. He was a bartender in like a dive bar in Oakland, and there's this time we were coming out of this combat outpost called Cop Ford, and we're like going on the serpentine thing, and we're like on this vehicle starting a work day, right? And my platoon leader just casually says, like on his little headset, he's just like, man, this is like, it's probably the most dangerous place I've ever been in my life. It's nuts. Like every day we go out here, it's just like the most dangerous place. And we're just driving around. And this guy, his vehicle commander, just goes, I don't know, sir. It seems pretty good to me. Like I'm from Oakland. He's like, in Oakland, I didn't have a striker and body armor and a 50 cal. Like I'm set. Like this is good. It's just like totally one of those moments, right? But yeah, I think it was really wild too, going back to La Cañada. I guess like coming full circle at the beginning of the conversation, right? Going back to a firmly upper middle class, quiet little neighborhood, like suburb of Los Angeles, where like people had served, of course, people I went to school with, but like it was that wasn't really, most people when you get deployed, you don't. Very few people serve on any kind of frontline combat role, and even fewer people really like see the elephant in the Civil War term. And there's also this thing too that the Army was cycling because of the way that they handled redeployments. They figured out way too late in the game that a very small proportion of the military had been deployed multiple times, and very small portion of the Army had been deployed multiple times, and most of the Army had not. And so for this very small group of people, they just kind of got in this churn where they would get deployed, they'd come back to a unit that was nearing the end of their deployment cycle, and then they would get deployed again, and it would just happen over and over again. That thankfully didn't happen to me. But I had this my pastor, the church I went to. He's like the nicest. He's one of the nicest guys you've ever met. Come back to like the stewardess, right? Like, flight attendant. She's just like, yeah.
No one has ever explained why it's not okay to say stewardess.
It's just a postmodernist deconstruction of modern society, man. But he was this guy. I always knew him as this just Pastor Bill, right? Just super nice, always happy, smiling, just like warm person. You're around him, you just feel like he could walk into an orphanage and everyone would be a little happier, right? And I remember walking up to him for the first church service after I got home, and he looked me in the eyes, and I could see something in his eyes. Man, I could just see something in his eyes. And he shook my hand. He said, "What's real?" Right? And like it was just this. Wow, like I had never connected with this man on that level of just like, I just knew he knew, right? Like, he knew, like I just knew this man knew, and I almost cried. And then my dad explained that he was a mortarman in Vietnam. And while I was deployed, he would like, my dad would go to him and be like, I'm really worried about Konrad. Like, this is the situation they're in, right? And he would tell my dad, like, yeah, this is what happened. We were in Vietnam, hunting Charlie. And like, the guy had been through the thick of it. And um, other like that would just, there's this surreality of like, everybody in America is still just getting lattes. Our gas is a little more expensive. Like you go back to California, you're not meeting a lot of people that served in the military. You're definitely not meeting a lot of people that served in combat. I lived in the Bay Area for a while. I went to the Mountain View like VA Center. I think it was Mountain View. Anyway, it's like run by Stanford. There's so few veterans that they had walk-in specialty service. Like I just walked in to the dental office and I got dental treatment, and I just walked in for a neurology appointment because there were just so few veterans in the Bay Area, and it was run by Stanford, so it was like the nicest medical facility I've ever seen by the VA, and it's like you were just a token person there. But then you go to you go to West LA, you see like it's like 28 days later with the people there. Or you go to somewhere in Texas and they have these massive VA hospitals where it's like everybody and their mom had somebody who served. And that was another thing that I think was really, really profound when I came back, was seeing, like, I think that's a big deal now politically, is I think there's just such a cultural deviation. Like people can have entirely different lives in the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I always complain about this to Americans, which the U.S. is 50 different countries.
Yeah.
I mean, the Federalist to me is like, it's 50 different countries, but also it's 50 different countries.
Yeah.
I mean, we span an entire continent, and we take up the majority of it. We're the majority of the population in North America. I mean, we're bigger than Europe. I mean, it's just, of course, there's huge differences, all over the place. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, well, yeah, man.
I have a lot of other questions. I'm gonna limit myself to just one.
Okay.
It's actually gonna be 2/3, whatever. It'll be counted as one.
That's
I'm
okay.
not good at arithmetic, so
And neither am I.
I think I'm not sure what it is now, but I think recently, maybe it was in the last year of Biden's term, that volunteer rates and retention rates were either at or near an all-time low across all branches of the military. It might even be true right now as well, but I think it's low. I think there was an uptick after Trump won.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's, certainly not anywhere near what it was in 2001 or decades prior. But still, there's going to be a lot of boys who are, considering going into the military and making a career of that, or, seeking out, like you did, an active role, right? Seeking out a combat role. What would you say to boys like that who are thinking of joining, who want that kind of life? Who do they need to be if they're going to join, and who can they expect to be after they join?
Man, that's like such an interesting question, because I was talking about the military is this subculture, and it's a very high octane subculture. When you leave it for a short amount of time, so much changes, and like in a lot of ways, a lot of things stay the same, right? But like everything is always changing, everything is always moving, and like the rules are constantly changing. I mean, they've had like 4 PT standards or something probably since the last time I was in. I was in, women were not allowed in direct combat roles. When I was in, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was still a thing. Like that went away my last year in the military. Um, and it was a wartime military. And like when I joined, you would join, and you would join a unit that had people who had gotten some, and there was a decent chance that you would at least get deployed. Like if you wanted to get deployed, you could make that happen. And then little things like I've talked about urban combat, right? Like sort of the amazing training, like the really unique opportunity we had in our unit to get that training. There was this video that went viral. Well, I think it was like 22 or something. It was like the 10th Mountain Division some guy wearing a GoPro going through this live fire shoot house. And it was the absolute worst urban combat, like room clearing tactics I think you could come up with. Like it was just like watching it. You're just like, this would so quickly get all of you killed. And it was hilarious. It went viral actually among GWAT veterans because of how bad it was. And it just was so bad that the commander, was it the command sergeant major of the 10th Mountain Division, had to like make a public statement being like, this does not reflect the traditions and capabilities of the 10th Mountain Division, and everybody in that unit has been retrained. I think the whole battalion had to go back and just like do MOUT for like a week or something. But I was talking to other veterans who were at college, like we were all sitting in the fishbowl in the library, kind of like watching this video laughing. And it was really interesting because like, I guess like at that point I'm realizing I'm one of the old salty guys, like, and like if this was Vietnam, I'm like the Vietnam vet, and I'm in this room full of guys that were in like Desert Storm. Like there's this guy who was in Black Hawk Down, there's a guy who was in Desert Storm, and I'm like, wow, like this is and like, I'm not saying that like they were in those conflicts, right? But like that was like the age gap. That was so I'm sitting here and I'm just like, yeah, I learned I learned military operations urban terrain like that. I learned that from guys who learned that from like special operators who did special clinics so that people could learn how to fight in a city, right? And my generation would like taught that to the next generation. And there's obviously a large group of people, like a huge amount of people left the infantry in particular because of that like meat grinder of getting deployed over and over and over again. So there was a big loss, I think, of institutional knowledge of urban terrain. And then Afghanistan ran on for so long that the whole urban combat wasn't really the thing. You're doing open field maneuvers, you're doing super long range engagements across entire valleys. So it's an entirely different war. It's a totally different set of tactics. And so it was really interesting seeing that and being like, how, like, not even in my lifetime, but in like what have felt like a very short amount of time, we've gone from having a degree of excellence expected of every unit for urban combat to having that be like this thing that goes viral for the 10th Mountain. And of course, okay, it could be the worst. Maybe that was just the worst squad in the 10th Mountain Division. I'm willing to give it to them. I don't think the entire 10th Mountain Division is like terrible at urban combat, right? But the idea that somebody would post that and actually think that like this is a thing that I'm going to post, like with my chest, and I'm going to say this is what I think people should see. So anyway, that's like a long thing of like it's kind of interesting for me. I don't really know. It's hard for me to divorce my like political opinions from should you serve, right? I got
more than that, but I've is what you were saying just now. Are you trying to stress that if you're going to join, you should want to be the best. You should want to be excellent in everything, not just at your job, but have the virtues that are necessary to serve well, to be able to do your job, do your duty, pull the trigger if you need to, but also be compassionate, be sympathetic, look out for your buddies.
Well, I think all those virtues are just, you should have that, right? Like I heard General Mad Dog Mattis, he had a great line that it's a old quote, and it's that combat makes good men better and bad men worse, right? So I mean, if you're a shitbag and you go to combat, you're going to be a terrible person. And that, if you really see it, you really get in the thick of it. Which, like, to clarify too, I mean, I obviously wrote this book, but like, there's so many people out there who have seen so much more hard combat than I have. And like, I think that when you're in it, like, you start realizing just how gray things get and how quickly it gets very difficult to like answer seemingly simple questions. But I mean, should somebody join the military now? I think what, like, we have the situation in Ukraine, we have the forever war of the Middle East, and the situation in Taiwan. And I think that I had the luxury of being able to join when joining was popular. I had the luxury of being able to join when there was at least some kind of clear mission. I knew what war I would go to, and I knew what to expect in some broad abstract sense, right? And I was going to be coming back to a body of politic that was at least somewhat engaged in that endeavor. And I think it's really challenging for somebody that wants to join the military now. I think about this as like my nephews, for example, are like in their early teens, And what if one of them wants to, like, I remember telling when they were like 2 years old or 3 years old, like, oh yeah, this is good. Well, Uncle Conrad went and fought monsters or whatever, right? And like, okay, well now like you're 13, um, and like that's the age I was when the towers fell, and like you're in a stone's throw away from joining the military. So I don't know, should you go join the infantry? I think generally what I would tell people, uh, you shouldn't join the military if you don't believe in the mission. If you don't believe, if you're not doing it for like I believe in the military, I believe in the country, some patriotic reason, I would not do it. Mostly because that you will become a cynical husk of a person by the time you're out. You will constantly be doing dumb stuff you think is stupid, and you will never be able to fall back on, I believe I'm doing the right thing. And that's critical for just surviving 3 years of being in a high protocol command environment, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think if you're gonna like join like the infantry, I think you should sincerely always keep in mind towards like, yeah, I might have to go fight in a place like Ukraine, but also accept that you probably won't, right? Like, we have a mutual friend who is a recon Marine,
Yep.
and he ended up in Okinawa, and like that guy is wow. Like he is a very talented warrior, right? I watched Black Hawk Down with him once, and that was like one of the most fun viewing experiences ever because we just got to spit back and forth about like how did you guys train that? How did you do this? Just pausing the movie constantly, right? And like unfortunately, he never got to be tested, and he joined in a time when you ostensibly should, when like Marines were still getting sent to Afghanistan, except he became a recon Marine. And the commander of the recon Marines was like, this is dumb. And there's nothing here you need recon Marines for. And it's outside of our mission set. So we're going to go do recon Marine stuff. We're not going to do stupid light infantry stuff where guys that have $1 million of training is just getting blown up or shot in the back. Right. And that was very difficult for him, and I think, um, now he's a dad. He's in a different phase of his life, but there's that thing of a young man who wants to go get challenged, and the military has a way of offering you that. And I think you should keep in mind that, like, don't rely on the war side of it, but there's a lot, even as dumb and gay as it might be, however LGBTQ friendly, or we're all, if they tell you we're going to do team patty cake once a month, like there are a lot of corners in the military where you can do a lot of really awesome stuff. If you are doing it for professional reasons, if you want to get some sort of training, you will never find an organization that can train you better. If you want to go there and do something interesting, go join the Navy, become a combat dive rescue swimmer, right? Go serve as a dive EOD specialist or something. If you can hack it, if that's what you want to do, there are places you can go and you can do amazing stuff. And then if the balloon ever goes up, like I think that's a great occupation to be. You're going to have a lot of autonomy, a lot of trust, a lot of good training, probably really good survivability. For everyone who just wants to get some, as much as I know what that's like, and I did that, I don't think that's not enough, right? And I think I think in my book, I think if you read the book, I cannot say right now any better than I think you'd get reading the book of like that personal journey from me, like a very naive, Bambi eye, just like I'm gonna get some, right, and then like at the end of it, just like whoa, okay, like, and I
Not
wasn't
that much.
yeah, right, and that's not even the trenches of Ypres. I'm not over in freaking Ukraine right now, where you
Yeah.
just like the I think what I consider to be the hardest combat I ever saw. Um, I'm thankful that it's not anywhere near the hardest combat I could imagine, and I'm also thankful that it was harder than most. Um, and Yeah, I guess I don't really know what else to say.
Conrad, thanks very much for joining. This has been awesome. I'll take more of your time at a later time. You probably want to go home and see the new baby, see your wife. Folks, the book is Stryker, The Siege of Sadr City. This is Konrad Ludwig. Thanks very much for coming on. Do you have any socials, by the way? You got like Substack or anything like that you want to pitch?
No, man, I live under a rock and I love it.
Well, that's good enough.
Yeah,
That's
I
I
I
know
don't know.
lots of people under rocks. They're good people.
Yeah, no, it's I moved to a quiet part of the country, and I got a good bit of land. I got a beautiful house. I got a beautiful wife, and a quiet job. And like I'd love to write again someday, but like it just hasn't really come out. But no, I don't really. I just burned out on all that, man. You know, so it's honestly it's just a bunch of huge corporations trying to steal your soul.
Fair enough. Speaking of used corporations, go to Amazon, check it out. There's also a free sample of this book. Pops you in right into the prologue. You're into the action. It's a incredibly riveting, excellent book. Super happy to talk to you, Konrad. Thanks very much.
Thanks, dude.